Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Sarah Foxwell. Sarah Foxwell was born on May 18, 1998, in Salisbury, Maryland, into a large family with 2 sisters and 4 brothers. Her mother had 3 additional children from a previous marriage. After her parents divorced, Sarah's mother struggled to care for her children alone. She worked long hours, so the children often stayed with relatives. As the middle child, Sarah played a peacemaking role, usually managing to bring her siblings together despite their frequent arguments. In December 2009, 11-year-old Sarah temporarily moved in with her aunt and grandparents, who lived in a spacious farmhouse on the outskirts of Salisbury. The kids loved visiting their aunt's home, which offered plenty of room to play. On December 22, 2009, the whole family was filled with joy and excitement, eagerly awaiting the upcoming Christmas day. After a pizza dinner, they began getting ready for bed around 9 p.m. Sarah shared a room with her 6-year-old sister, Emma, at the end of the hallway near the back door. The sisters chatted for a bit before falling asleep. The next morning, Sarah's grandfather went to wake the kids, but only found Emma in the room. He searched the entire house, thinking Sarah might have already gotten up, but couldn't find her anywhere. He informed Sarah's aunt, and together they thoroughly searched every room and corner of the house. When they couldn't find Sarah, her aunt suggested she might have gone outside to play in the snow, but her shoes and jacket were still at home. Then, her aunt noticed that Sarah's toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. After searching the surrounding area and finding no Sarah, her aunt called Sarah's mother, who rushed over. They then contacted the police, who arrived quickly and began searching the house. Sarah's aunt explained that she always checked the doors and windows every night before bed, including the previous evening, and the police couldn't find any signs of Sarah inside or nearby. When they learned about the missing toothbrush, the officers considered the possibility of an abduction, thinking the kidnapper might have taken the toothbrush before leaving with Sarah. They then decided to verify if all the doors and windows were indeed locked as Sarah's aunt had claimed. As investigators approached the back door next to Sarah's room, they found it unlocked, despite her aunt's insistence that it had been locked the night before. This discovery raised suspicions, since the family kept a spare key outside, which was now missing. The fact that the perpetrator knew about the spare key shows that he was very familiar with this family. Furthermore, the family's dog, which normally barked at strangers, had remained silent that night. The police launched a massive search operation, fearing that Sarah might have been kidnapped. News of her disappearance spread quickly, prompting many local residents to contact the police and offer their assistance. The police chief has made a public appeal through the media, asking people to check their cameras for any suspicious activity. Dozens of local police officers joined the search, with assistance from neighboring town police departments and police from other states. The police were hopeful that they would find Sarah alive, as the perpetrator had taken her toothbrush, which could indicate that they intended to keep her alive. With this in mind, the police dedicated all their resources to the search. Outside the house, investigators found their first clue, fresh tire tracks in the snow, suggesting the kidnapper had arrived by car. Since Sarah's warm clothing was still at home, it was unlikely the kidnapper had taken her on foot. Meanwhile, at the police station, Sarah's family was in for a surprise. Her 6-year-old sister, Emma, who shared a room with Sarah, whispered to their grandmother that she had seen the person who took Sarah. Emma claimed she had woken up to a man talking to Sarah, but pretended to be asleep, unsure of what was happening. She then saw the man leave the room with Sarah. What Emma said next sent shockwaves through the family. She knew the man who took Sarah. It was Mr. Thomas, the ex-boyfriend of Sarah's aunt. A man named Thomas had a history of violence against women and girls. Despite his criminal record, he spent a lot of time at Aunt Sarah's house and the children got to know him. The police knew Thomas well because he had many criminal records. Thomas first went to prison at 18 for attacking a 12-year-old girl, but he was released early after just a few months. He was sentenced again for assaulting another minor, but he was released early once more, this time after serving 6 months due to good behavior. Thomas continued to exhibit violent behavior, including another assault for which he received a 6-month sentence. He also tried to assault a girl on the same day his wife returned home from the hospital with their newborn baby. His wife eventually divorced him and obtained a restraining order after he threatened to kill her and their daughter. In another disturbing incident, Thomas targeted 2 young girls sitting on a porch. He approached them, claiming he had been watching one of them play in the yard, and called her a wild girl. He then used a stick to hit her on the buttocks, prompting her to run inside and tell her mother about the attack. She recognized Thomas from the window and recalled seeing his face before she moved into the house. She had previously checked the local sex offender registry and found his photo listed. She immediately reported him to the police, and the case proceeded to court. However, Thomas avoided punishment for his actions. Before the trial, she was threatened not to mention that Thomas was a sex offender and had a previous conviction for sexual assault. A few months prior to Sarah's disappearance, Thomas was arrested again for breaking into a 24-year-old woman's bedroom at night, undressing, and masturbating beside her bed. He was released on bail after his arrest. Initially, Thomas hid his criminal past from Sarah's aunt, but she eventually discovered the truth. Despite this, Thomas managed to persuade her that the accusations against him were false and that he was innocent. Detectives are certain that Thomas was the person who kidnapped Sarah. This suspicion was reinforced by the fact that during his relationship with Sarah's aunt, he had spent an inordinate amount of time with Sarah, more so than with the other children in the household. At the time, this behavior didn't seem unusual, but now that Sarah is missing, it appears highly suspicious. To further investigate, the police visited Thomas's residence, a shed located on his parents' property just a few miles away. They brought him in for questioning and obtained a search warrant for the shed. Upon searching, they found it to be in disarray with poor living conditions, but no evidence linking Thomas to Sarah's disappearance was discovered. However, the police did find a large collection of adult magazines and DVDs, which filled the shed. During the interrogation, Thomas denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he was struggling with his own personal issues, specifically his tendency to commit crimes against underage girls. According to Thomas, he had made a conscious effort to avoid being alone with the children while dating Sarah's aunt, in order to avoid any false accusations. When confronted with Emma's testimony, which placed him at the scene of the abduction, Thomas dismissed her account, stating that she had a history of fabricating stories and that he was not there on the night in question. Detectives were skeptical of Thomas's story. It wasn't just because of his prior convictions. As they questioned him about 11-year-old Sarah's disappearance, Thomas seemed to take pleasure in the situation, smiling and mocking the sheriff. Although it is certain that he planned the crime without any mistakes, the police still work hard to solve the case and find out the truth about what really happened. Thomas claimed to have a solid alibi, stating he was at a bar with a friend until late at night. However, investigators found a discrepancy in his story. Although he was indeed at the bar, he left around 1 a.m. and wasn't seen again until 7 a.m. the next morning. A review of his phone records revealed that he had sent messages to several women, proposing to meet up, but all of them declined. Despite the inconsistencies in Thomas's story, detectives still couldn't gather enough evidence to incriminate him. Their primary concern was finding Sarah, and they poured all their resources into the search. A search of Thomas's pickup truck yielded several crucial clues. Inside, they found Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop, which suggested that Thomas might have used the candy to lure her into his vehicle. Furthermore, The tire tracks on his truck matched the ones found in the snow outside the house on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Thomas had lied about not visiting Aunt Sarah's house for more than a month. This did not deter the police and volunteers from continuing their search for Sarah. They searched extensively, covering many miles around her house, checking abandoned buildings, forests, ravines, and bodies of water. K-9 units and helicopters assisted in the search. The community provided immense support to the police efforts, with hundreds signing up to volunteer. The poor weather and upcoming holidays did not dampen the search, but unfortunately, the efforts yielded no results. The search party resumed early the next morning, with their numbers increasing rather than dwindling. Eventually, the number of volunteers swelled to 3,000 people. Due to the sheer volume of volunteers, the coordination center had to be relocated from the police station to a larger venue, the local baseball stadium. Many of the volunteers brought their children to assist, handing out essentials such as water, hot tea, and food. Despite the odds, the search continued with renewed determination to find Sarah alive. While investigators were questioning Thomas, they received another crucial piece of evidence. After he was brought to the station, his clothes were sent to the lab for analysis. Experts discovered foreign DNA on Thomas's underwear, which they compared to a DNA sample from Sarah's belongings. The results showed a complete match, leading detectives to a disturbing conclusion. It appeared that Thomas had sexually assaulted Sarah after abducting her. Despite the lack of progress in the search, thousands of people gathered on Christmas Day, December 25th, to continue looking for Sarah. Meanwhile, investigators obtained GPS data from Thomas's phone, which showed the cell towers his phone had connected to, although the exact locations were not provided. Police discovered that on the night Sarah vanished, her phone had connected to 3 cell towers, allowing them to narrow down the search area to a roughly triangular zone. Investigators focused on this location, located near the state border, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's home. The area was densely wooded, but hundreds of people thoroughly searched every inch of the territory, holding out hope for a Christmas miracle that Sarah would be found alive. Sadly, the outcome was far more tragic. Around 4 p.m., police discovered Sarah's body on the ground, near the state border. She was lying on her back with her arms raised upwards, pointing towards the sky. Medical experts performed an autopsy and were shocked by what they discovered. They confirmed that Sarah had been sexually assaulted and showed signs of strangulation. Additionally, experts found dirt in Sarah's lungs, suggesting that the perpetrator had attempted to drown her in a puddle. During this torture, Sarah lost consciousness. The experts also found evidence that Sarah had suffered severe burns. It is believed that the perpetrator may have left her lying in the forest for some time, went to get gasoline, and then returned to set Sarah on fire. Significantly, traces of smoke were found in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive when the fire was set. This also explains why her hands were raised and pointing to the sky. Likely a reflex reaction to the fire. The sheer cruelty of these actions shocked and horrified everyone involved in the case, including the detectives. After reconstructing the case, the investigators' main goal is to ensure that the perpetrator, Thomas, receives the death penalty. Thomas continued to deny any involvement in Sarah's disappearance, but the evidence against him was substantial. After discovering Sarah's body, forensic experts found several strands of hair and pieces of fabric from Sarah's pajamas on the front seat of Thomas's pickup truck, further linking him to her kidnapping. Based on all the evidence, it is very unlikely that Thomas will escape punishment. The trial was delayed for over a year, but it never took place. In early 2011, the prosecution offered Thomas a plea deal. Under the terms of the agreement, Thomas would plead guilty and receive a life sentence, rather than facing the death penalty. While this deal may seem lenient considering Thomas's crimes, there were valid reasons for accepting it. A key consideration was that Sarah's younger sister would have to testify multiple times in court, facing the man who had murdered her sister. Sarah's kidnapping and murder were devastating for her family, and there was a risk that the trial's outcome might not bring them the justice they sought. Due to uncertainty about securing the death penalty, the prosecution presented a plea deal. This deal meant that Thomas would not receive the death penalty, and in return, he would plead guilty to the crime. The terms of the deal also ensured that Thomas would not be eligible for early release from prison. Another issue was that the state governor at the time opposed the death penalty. Ultimately, Thomas agreed to the deal and confessed to the detectives, revealing details they already knew. He admitted to tricking Sarah into leaving her house with him, then taking her away, sexually assaulting her, and killing her. As a result, Thomas received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. During his initial days in prison, Thomas was assaulted by a fellow inmate with a homemade weapon during lunch, resulting in several severe lacerations. Despite the attack, Thomas survived and was later given increased protection by prison staff. The public was outraged by Sarah's case, which exposed repeated failures in Thomas's custody, allowing him to be released but continue to commit crimes. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kaler family. James Craig Kaler was born in Weatherford, Texas in 1963, and his future wife, Karen Kaler, was born in the same city 2 years later. They met in the early 1980s while attending a university in Texas. At the time, Craig was a senior studying engineering, and Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. Despite their different fields of study, they quickly discovered common interests and started a romantic relationship. After graduating, they had a small, intimate wedding with close friends and family. They welcomed their first child, Emily, in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. The family lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle, with a higher-than-average income for their area. In 1999, Craig received a lucrative job offer from a major utility company in Weatherford, which coincided with the birth of their son, Sean. Craig adored his son and, with his increased salary, purchased a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and a family car. Karen stayed at home to care for their children, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. From the outside, their family appeared to be living a perfect life. Their 3 children have also had many successes in their fields. Emily and Lauren are talented in sports and music. Emily studies at a prestigious pharmacy college and Lauren hopes to attend a conservatory. Sean, on the other hand, showed a keen interest in mathematics and had dreams of becoming an archaeologist. The family's home life seemed idyllic, Craig providing for the family and Karen taking care of the household and raising the children. However, the family was struggling with hidden problems. In 2007, Karen confided in her sister Linda, revealing that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to Craig's controlling behavior. Craig exerted total control over Karen's daily life, demanding a detailed account of every expense, no matter how small, and requiring her to report her whereabouts at all times. The family lives on a strict schedule, with Craig setting their daily routines, including bedtime, wake-up time, meal times. This rigidity makes Karen feel suffocated and trapped. Over time, Craig's need for control grew stronger. He became more demanding and selfish, scheduling Karen's every move. She felt like she had no time left for herself, there was only duty to complete. Karen tried to meet her husband's demands, hoping he would ease up and they could return to their normal life. However, Craig seemed to enjoy exerting control and refused to change. Linda was extremely worried about her sister's confide. Like everyone else, she saw Craig as the ideal husband, father, and family man, only to discover he was a controlling man. Despite this, Karen didn't want to break up her family. Additionally, she and her children relied on Craig financially. So, she decided to find a job that would give her a stable income. She joined a local gym without telling her husband, using it as an escape to clear her mind and work through her emotions. She spent several hours there every day, scheduling her time around her husband Craig's work schedule so he wouldn't notice. Not long after, the gym manager noticed her because of her attractive appearance, excellent fitness, and her hard work. Karen was given the chance to work as a fitness with the possibility of a permanent contract. This was a dream come true for her, as she could now get paid for doing something she loved. However, she was worried about how her husband, Craig, would react when he found out. When Craig found out about Karen's new job, she thought he would be angry and forbid her to continue. Surprisingly, he received this news calmly and even seemed pleased that she had found a way to make money on her own. He had a few conditions. She had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and not let her new job interfere with their intimate life. Karen found these conditions acceptable, as she now had more freedom and independence. As Karen settled into her new job, she met a new instructor named Sonny Reese, and they quickly became friends. For Karen, who had spent years at home with little social interaction, Sonny became a trusted confidant. The two women spent time together at work, went for walks, had coffee, and shared heartfelt conversations. But little did Karen know, this new friendship would soon lead to unexpected romance and a complicated love triangle. It didn't take long for Karen and Sonny's friendship to evolve into a romantic relationship. At first, they kept their feelings a secret from everyone. However, after some time, Karen decided it was necessary to be honest with her husband, Craig. She spent months preparing for this conversation, searching for the right words and worrying about the potential consequences. Eventually, she confessed to Craig. Craig's reaction to his wife's revelation was surprisingly calm. However, the next day, he made an unexpected condition for accepting Karen's relationship with Sonny, which was that he wanted to be a part of it. Karen was shocked and unsure of how to respond to her husband's talk. Nevertheless, Craig took the initiative and began wooing Sonny, sending her flowers and gifts. He seemed to view this as an opportunity to revitalize his intimate life and bring new passion to his marriage. Initially, Karen and Sonny agreed to Craig's proposal. However, they soon realized that his intentions were aimed at domination. However, their unusual love triangle was short-lived. Craig demanded that Karen end the affair immediately. Despite this, Karen continued to see Sonny, as she had genuinely fallen in love. After almost 20 years of marriage, Karen seemed ready to leave her husband for someone new. This led to a series of secret actions, including moving to another state, scheduling secret meetings. In an attempt to salvage his family, Craig thought it best to relocate to another state. He started job hunting, sending out his resume, and soon secured a role as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, not far from Kansas. Craig hoped that by moving to a new state, his wife's affair with Sonny would end, and their family life would normalize. However, the summer 2008 move proved challenging for the family, as the kids had to switch schools, make new friends, and adapt to a new city. Although the family was already financially comfortable, Craig's new job nearly doubled his previous salary from Weatherford. Despite his increased responsibilities and work hours, Craig mistakenly believed he had successfully removed Sonny from his wife's life. However, Karen and Sonny continued to communicate regularly through calls, texts, and secret meetings. They would meet halfway, spend a couple of hours in a roadside hotel, and then return home. At this point, Karen realized her marriage was over. She no longer loved Craig, and it was only a matter of time before they divorced. These clandestine meetings persisted until December 2008. At the New Year's Eve celebration that year, the Kaler family went back to their hometown to reconnect with relatives and friends. Sonny was also in attendance at the gathering. Initially, Karen and Sonny kept a low profile, merely exchanging greetings. As the celebration continues and the alcohol slowly affects Karen and Sonny's behavior, they seem to have no regard for social norms. They became inseparable, openly showing affection by holding hands, sharing romantic glances. They even kissed. Craig's anger boiled over into fury after Karen publicly humiliated him by revealing her affair at a party attended by dozens of acquaintances. He lashed out at Karen and Sonny before dragging Karen away from the party. In his rage, Craig lost control and physically assaulted Karen, ripping her dress and slapping her, causing her to fall and hit her head. The incident marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. A few days later, Karen announced she was leaving Craig and initiated divorce proceedings, seeking custody of their children. Initially, Craig attempted to apologize and salvage their relationship for the sake of the children. But Karen was resolute. She said they should divorce, causing Craig to contact friends and family, begging them to convince Karen to reconsider. In the spring of 2009, Craig and Karen's marriage continued to deteriorate. Despite Craig's attempts to salvage their relationship, Karen made it clear she was leaving him for Sonny and she had never been truly happy in their marriage. The tension between them escalated into physical violence, with Craig grabbing Karen during an argument, leaving bruises on her arms. Karen reported the incident to the police, leading to Craig's arrest. After the incident, Karen took the children and moved out without waiting for the divorce to be finalized. Craig was devastated by her departure and even more so when he discovered that his daughters, Emily and Lauren, were siding with their mother. They told him that they had never seen their mother so happy, which Craig perceived as a betrayal. As a result, he cut off contact with his daughters, only spending time with his son Sean on weekends. Despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig held on to the hope that Karen would change her mind and return to him. His desire to control her led him to engage in jealous behavior, including stalking her and attempting to install a hidden camera in her home. To pursue this, Craig sacrificed his work, initially taking vacation time, then claiming illness, and eventually skipping work altogether without explanation. This reckless behavior resulted in Craig's termination from his job. Without a steady income, he was forced to move in with his parents as he could no longer afford to live on his own. With ample free time, Craig began stalking Karen, prompting her to take him to court to obtain a restraining order. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit their 89-year-old grandmother, Dorothy White, in Burlingame, Kansas. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame police received a distress call about a suspicious van and reports of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported witnessing a small truck pull up to her house. A man exit the vehicle and enter the house. They claimed to have heard screams and gunshots, but were uncertain. The man then left the house, got back into the truck, and sped away. The neighbors did not attempt to apprehend him, fearing he was armed. When police arrived, they were met by 10-year-old Sean Kaler, who was frantically calling for help. Although Sean was unable to explain what had happened, it was clear that a horrific scene awaited the police. Inside the home, near the front door, Sonny was found lying in a pool of blood but surprisingly still alive despite having 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police discovered the lifeless body of 44-year-old Karen, who had been shot in the chest and then fatally shot at close range in the head. The body of her oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, was found between a wall and a couch. It appeared that Emily had attempted to hide from her enraged father but was caught and killed with 2 point-blank shots. Lauren, found in a pool of blood in the second-floor bedroom, was still alive but weakly called for help and repeatedly said that her father was the one who did it. Dorothy and Lauren were rushed to a nearby hospital's intensive care unit. Despite the doctor's efforts, Lauren died on December 1st due to massive blood loss and internal organ damage. Her great-grandmother passed away a few hours later. Sean, the only surviving witness, was in shock. Psychologists worked with him, but a thorough interrogation was necessary as he was the only living witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. Sean recounted that evening, stating that his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he approached her to ask for his favorite pie. Suddenly, the back door swung open, and his father entered with a shotgun, pointing it at Karen without a word. He shot her, then moved closer and fired again. Sean was initially frozen in horror. His father then turned to Sean but didn't aim the gun. Instead, Craig stared at Sean silently and intently. Sean realized he had to escape. So he jumped out the open back door. He ran towards the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother, sisters, and call for help. However, upon reaching the threshold, he heard several more gunshots. Fearing what he might find inside, Sean hid in a small outbuilding. He heard more gunshots and waited in terror, afraid that his father would come after him. Craig Kaler was immediately added to the wanted list, with a warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. As police received multiple reports of a speeding truck, they were able to quickly determine the direction the gunman was heading. At one point, Craig abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement soon caught up with him and apprehended him the next morning. Upon arrest, police found the rifle and ammunition in the back seat of the abandoned vehicle, along with prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders near the driver's seat. Craig did not resist arrest and appeared confused and frightened. He admitted to being armed with a gun and a hunting knife, but claimed he did not intend to use them. He also acknowledged that he had done something terrible, which he believed the police already knew about. At the police station, Craig fully confessed to his crimes and opened up to the investigating officer. He shared how his wife had cheated on him with someone named Sonny and how they had humiliated him in front of friends at a New Year's Eve party. He explained how his attempts to save his marriage had cost him his job and what was left of his self-respect. Craig became emotional, stating that he didn't know how he had decided to take such drastic action and felt that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. Craig's trial started in December 2010. Craig, advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, retracted his initial confession. He claimed his actions were due to mental illness and insanity, which was his only defense to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney argued that Craig was in a fragile mental state following a series of personal setbacks. His wife had left him for someone else, his children sided with their mother, he lost his job, and had to move back in with his parents. According to Heaney, these factors led to a breakdown, and Craig committed the crime while insane, without realizing what he was doing. However, the prosecution found no evidence of insanity or an altered mental state in Craig's actions. They argued that his actions were calculated, as he had purchased guns and ammunition in advance and went to the victim's house knowing his family was there. He shot each victim twice, ensuring no chance of survival, but intentionally spared his son Sean, allowing him to escape. In August 2011, Craig was found guilty on all counts and received a death sentence. At the final hearing, 12-year-old Sean testified, stating that he didn't want his father to die, as he was his only remaining close relative. Despite multiple appeals by Craig and his lawyers, the verdict has remained unchanged. As of today, Craig is still in prison, fighting to have the case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. After the death of his mother and sisters, Sean moved in with his grandmother. Now Sean has grown up and he has completed his studies and chosen to stay and work in his hometown. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Mike Williams. Mike Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, north of Tallahassee. He was the son of a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. Family and friends called him Mike. Even though the family didn't have much money and Mike, along with his older brother, grew up living in a trailer, those were happy times. The parents cared about their son's future, and instead of building a house, they set aside money for the education of both boys, who themselves worked part-time at night in supermarkets. Mike enrolled in North Florida Christian High School, where he excelled. He became student council president, played soccer, and was active in the Key Club. At the age of 15, Mike started duck hunting as a hobby and met Denise Merrill. Denise was a cheerleader and council secretary, and they began dating. Friends thought they were a great couple. While still in high school, Mike became best friends with Brian Winchester, whom Denise had introduced him to. Brian later had a friend, Katie Thomas, and the two couples remained friends for the rest of Mike's life. After high school, Mike and Denise attended Florida State University, where they both majored in political science and urban planning. The lovers graduated together. Denise became a public accountant, and Mike became a real estate appraiser. Mike proved himself to be a dedicated and hard-working individual, consistently putting in 15-hour days, which led to rapid success in his career. In 1994, he married Denise, and around the same time, his friend Brian married Kathy. The four of them maintained a close and supportive relationship. Mike loved his wife deeply and was determined to provide for their family to the best of his ability. He had boundless energy and was a high achiever. By the age of 31, Mike Williams had achieved significant success as a real estate appraiser, earning a substantial annual income of nearly $200,000. This allowed the couple to purchase a comfortable home in an upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and in 1999, they welcomed a daughter into their family. Although Mike was prudent, he had a tendency to engage in risky activities, which prompted his friends to warn Denise about them. To ensure his family's financial security, Mike sought the advice of his trusted friend Brian, who worked as an insurance agent. Brian sold Mike 2 life insurance policies, one worth $250,000 and another worth $500, providing financial protection for his loved ones in the event of an unforeseen disaster. In 2000, Mike's father died, which had a profound impact on Mike. To ensure his family's financial security, Mike turned to his friend Brian for help. Brian assisted Mike in getting a $1 million life insurance policy, adding to an existing policy and bringing the total coverage to nearly $2 million, just 6 months before Mike vanished. On December 16, 2000, their 6th wedding anniversary, Mike woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. Denise and their daughter stayed at home, expecting Mike to return that day so they could celebrate their anniversary with a planned night out in Apalachicola, a small town on the bayou. However, Mike didn't come back, prompting Denise to become worried and call her father. Her father then contacted Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Brian and his father drove to Lake Seminole, where they found Mike's Ford Bronco parked near the boat dock, but Mike was missing. The search for Mike began, and after a few hours, a helicopter pilot located the boat drifting approximately 225 feet away from the boat ramp. Notably, Mike's shotgun was still in its case on board, indicating that he was never able to use it. This discovery led to a shift in the operation from a rescue mission to a recovery effort. Locals familiar with the area informed the search team that the location was previously an orchard, known as Stump Field, due to the numerous stumps both above and below the water level, which made navigating motorized boats through the area hazardous. The search team formulated a theory about what might have happened to Mike. He might have collided with a stump while operating his boat, fallen into the water, and become trapped, with his boots filling with water and ultimately causing him to drown. Several agencies, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, participated in the search for Mike. Although they made an extensive and systematic effort, they did not find any signs of him. After a week, The search operation shifted its focus to a body recovery effort. Search teams used probe poles to scan the lake bottom and brought in dogs to assist. 10 days into the search, volunteers found a camouflage-patterned hunting hat, but it could not be confirmed as belonging to Mike. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency suggested that Mike might have been attacked by alligators, which could explain why his body was never found, given the lake's known alligator population. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement did not find any evidence of a violent death and supported this theory. The search was finally called off after 5 weeks. The day after the authorities gave up searching for Mike, Denise put together a memorial service to pay tribute to him. While it appeared to everyone that Denise had come to terms with losing her husband, Mike's mother was still grappling with the loss. 6 months down the line, in June 2001, a fisherman stumbled upon a sinister find: a pair of boots bobbing on the lake's surface. This prompted a team of divers to scour the lake, and they fished out a lightweight hunting jacket and flashlight from the depths. When they examined the jacket, they found a hunting license with Mike Williams' name and signature tucked away in one of its pockets. The discovery of the hunting jacket and boots raised many questions about Mike Williams' disappearance. The fact that neither item showed signs of an alligator attack and appeared to have been recently placed in the water rather than having been there for 6 months was suspicious. The boots, for example, were not slimy, and the flashlight still worked. Despite these inconsistencies, a week later, Denise's attorney requested that the court declare Mike Williams dead, citing the discovery of his belongings as evidence. The attorney suggested that alligators and other aquatic life had likely consumed his body whole. The court granted the motion, and the death certificate was issued, stating that Mike died on December 16, 2000, due to accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. However, Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, refused to accept this conclusion and continued to search for her son. Her efforts caused tension with her former sister-in-law, Denise, who demanded that she stop searching and accept reality. Cheryl's persistence eventually led to a strained relationship between the two women, and Denise followed through on her threat. Undeterred, Cheryl spent the next 3 years fighting to have Mike's disappearance investigated. She made numerous phone calls, posted signs, wrote to the governor, compiled a book of evidence, and contacted reporters. Her persistence finally paid off when she convinced an alligator expert, Matthew Oresco, to get involved. Oresco explained that alligators don't feed during the cold winter months, and that there would always be forensic evidence left behind after an alligator kill. After 3 years, Cheryl Williams finally persuaded law enforcement to abandon the alligator attack theory and launch an official investigation into her son Mike's disappearance. The case was reopened based on newly uncovered facts about alligators' eating habits and evidence gathered from interviews and official data. Former investigator Ronnie Austin revealed that the general consensus among law enforcement agencies was that Mike's death was not accidental. Initially, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency took charge of the case, as Mike was considered a missing hunter. They spent 735 hours searching a 10-acre section of the lake for his body, but neglected to explore other possibilities. Subsequent investigations involved interviewing all those involved in the search, including police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene. He pointed out several suspicious circumstances. Mike rarely hunted alone. His truck was found in an undeveloped area, and the severe storm that night should have pushed the boat to the east shore, yet it was found on the west shore. Furthermore, the boat's motor was not running, despite being full of gasoline. If Mike had fallen out of the boat while driving, it would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of gas. Unfortunately, law enforcement realized too late that they were not dealing with a simple drowning. By then, the crime scene had already been compromised by numerous volunteers and searchers. A car that could have been a vital clue was taken by the family without proper verification, and potential witnesses were overlooked. Denise Williams and Brian Winchester aroused the suspicion of investigators due to their sudden union. The fact that Winchester had divorced his wife Kathy and married Denise raised eyebrows. Further investigation revealed that Denise had received a substantial financial gain of nearly $2 million from her late husband's life insurance policy. Detectives discovered that Winchester was the one who had sold the policy to Mike. It was also peculiar that Denise, as Mike's wife, showed little interest in the investigation and actively tried to hinder Cheryl's efforts, even going so far as to forbid the grandmother from communicating with her granddaughter. When the newlywed couple was brought in for questioning, their statements failed to shed new light on the case. Brian provided an alibi, stating that he was 60 miles from the lake and at home in bed at the time of Mike's disappearance, which his ex-wife Kathy could corroborate. He claimed that he had intended to go hunting with his father-in-law that morning, but overslept. Denise's interrogation also yielded no new leads. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement revealed that Mike's disappearance was not accidental, and they suspect he was a victim of a crime. However, due to the lack of sufficient evidence, they are unable to bring charges. Despite this, Cheryl Williams persisted, and her efforts led to the Discovery Cable Channel featuring a story on Mike's disappearance and the subsequent investigations. By that time, Cheryl had become disenchanted with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, convinced that they were either incapable or uninterested in resolving the case. Starting in 2012, Mike's mother, Cheryl, began a campaign to push for a new investigator or special prosecutor in Mike's case. Over 9 years, she wrote a staggering 2,600 letters to Governor Rick Scott, pleading her case. Meanwhile, in 2012, Denise discovered that Brian was cheating on her, and they broke up. The following year, she filed for divorce. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, an appraisal of their former family home was scheduled, which would finally free them from their property disputes. This event marked a turning point in Mike's case. The breakup was acrimonious, with Brian refusing to accept the divorce and Denise refusing to continue the relationship. Their constant fighting was further complicated by the Williams investigation, which seemed to be mocking them. Brian continued to call Denise, but she stopped taking his calls. The stress was taking a toll on him. On August 5, 2016, the day of the scheduled real estate appraisal, Denise left her home to drive to her job at Florida State University. As she chatted with her sister on the phone, she noticed someone climbing into the back seat of her car. To her shock, it was Winchester. Brian, who had been hiding in the back seat, pressed a loaded gun against Denise's ribs and ordered her to drive straight ahead. He claimed he was forced to take this drastic measure because she had stopped answering his calls. Denise attempted to placate Brian by agreeing with everything he said and promising to give him a chance to salvage their marriage. Naively, Brian believed her. Denise reassured him that she wouldn't report the incident to the police, and Brian exited the car, taking with him the brown sheet, plastic sheeting, bleach sprayer, and tools. It became evident that Denise had narrowly escaped death. Denise promptly called emergency services, and Brian was swiftly arrested and charged with kidnapping, a first-degree felony in Florida carrying a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. He was also charged with domestic violence and armed burglary. The court ruled to detain Brian without bail. Cheryl Williams, hopeful that this development would shed light on her son's disappearance case, expressed optimism. Denise told the New York Daily News that she thought Brian was motivated by their wealth and prayed that he would reveal the truth. In a surprising turn of events, Brian cooperated, negotiating a lenient deal with the prosecutor and avoiding a life sentence. Brian began his confession by saying that initially, their marriage was going well, but he was a bad husband. He discovered a note in his first wife Kathy's purse, revealing her infidelity, and he sought revenge. They regularly socialized with Denise and Mike, going to bars and concerts together. Brian had known Denise since high school, but it wasn't until his girlfriend Kathy cheated on him that he started viewing Denise in a romantic light. The affair between Brian and Denise started in October 1997. What began as a drunken one-night stand at a rock concert soon turned into frequent secret trysts. They would meet at hotels during the workday whenever possible. Brian didn't want to divorce Kathy, but Denise made it clear she wouldn't leave her husband. She cared deeply about public opinion and didn't want to risk losing custody of her daughter. Over time, their affair evolved beyond casual sex. Denise and Brian saw themselves as a couple, exchanging gifts and love letters. It became apparent they couldn't continue like this. They couldn't bear to be apart. But divorce was off the table for Denise. Her reputation as a pious person had to remain intact. Then, Mike nearly died in a hunting accident, and Brian saved his life. Denise saw an opportunity to escape her predicament. After making a deal with the prosecutor, Brian will disclose that the year 2000 sparked discussions about Mike and Kathy's death. According to Brian, Denise had wanted to deflect responsibility, placing the blame solely on him and not herself. She had preferred a scenario in which their deaths would be viewed as an accident rather than a murder, thereby allowing her to convince herself that their fate was in God's hands, which would enable her to live with the consequences. After considering various options, Brian and Denise chose to stage a boating accident. They planned the murder to coincide with the maximum payout on Mike's life insurance policy, which was set to expire at the end of December 2000. The plan was in place. Brian invited Mike on a hunting trip, claiming he'd found an ideal spot on Lake Semol's shores. Mike thought he'd be back home by noon to celebrate his anniversary with his wife. Brian told him to bring his wading boots, as they were essential for the trip. Unbeknownst to Mike, Brian had a sinister motive. If he fell overboard wearing wading boots, he'd supposedly drown quickly. The plan was to make Mike's death appear as an accidental drowning. Once they were in the water, Brian pushed Mike out of the boat. However, Mike grabbed onto nearby stumps and started wading through the water towards the shore. Brian panicked, not knowing how to react. Mike began shouting for help, and Brian, desperate and confused, grabbed a shotgun and shot Mike in the head without thinking of the consequences. Brian's plan had unraveled, and he had to cover his tracks. Time was running out. He should have been home by now, getting ready to go hunting with his father-in-law. Since no one knew he was at the lake with Mike, Brian decided to drive home and pretend he'd overslept. He hoped Kathy would still be asleep. Brian entered the house as quietly as possible. Kathy was asleep, and his phone was on the floor. He went to bed, then called his father-in-law to apologize. Next, Brian created an alibi for himself before hiding the body. Denise was unaware that Brian had shot Mike in the head and buried him. Brian tried to confess, but Denise didn't want to hear it. For her, it was enough that her husband was gone. She preferred to believe that God had prevented Mike from swimming out and let him drown, as Brian had suggested. They promised each other to keep the secret. Denise and Brian rationalized the killing, claiming that Mike's presence made it impossible for them to live together. They downplayed the role of money, saying it was just an added bonus. Brian testified in court that investigators had discovered he had planted a hat, boots, flashlight, and license as part of a ruse. His aim was twofold. First, to deter searchers from abandoning the lake, and later, to provide justification for declaring Mike dead, thereby allowing Denise to collect insurance benefits. Impressively, they managed to expedite the typically 5-year recognition process to just 7 months, securing not only Social Security benefits, but also other advantages. As a result, Denise received approximately $2 million on May 8, 2018. Denise Williams faced charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and being an accessory to a felony, all of which carried a life sentence. Despite pleading not guilty to all 3 charges, Denise was sentenced to life imprisonment in February 2019. 5 months later, Mike and Denise's daughter Ansley inherited all of her late father's assets and the insurance money that had been owed to Denise. Denise Williams appealed her conviction and life sentence. Her attorney argued before Florida's First District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence to implicate her in the actual murder. In November 2020, the murder conviction was overturned, although the 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld. Denise is currently being held at the Florida Women's Reception Center and will be 78 years old upon her release. Brian Winchester is currently serving the remainder of his sentence at Madison Correctional Institute in Florida, with a scheduled release date of July 30th, 2036, at which point he will be 67 years old. Ansley, the daughter of Mike and Denise, firmly believes her mother is innocent and attributes responsibility to Brian Winchester. While refusing to discuss the case or her personal life with the media, Ansley remains estranged from her uncle, Nick, and grandmother, Cheryl, who are distressed by their inability to connect with her. Cheryl deeply regrets having lost both her son and her granddaughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Anna Walsh. Anna Luic, later known as Anna O'Neill, was born on April 18, 1983 in Belgrade, Serbia. She grew up in a cultured family with her younger sister. At the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, Anna excelled as a standout student. She then attended Belgrade Research University, the most historic and expansive university in Serbia. Anna pursued foreign languages, earning a master's degree in French language and literature at 22. With her diploma, Anna sought a new chapter in the United States, fully supported by her family. In 2005, she settled in the U.S., aiming to further her education in hospitality management. She took administrative roles at prestigious hotels, including the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia. Anna's warm approach, sense of duty, and conflict resolution skills quickly earned her respect from peers and supervisors. Multilingual and charming, she formed connections easily. Beloved by colleagues and friends, Anna seized every chance to shine. She became a U.S. citizen, retaining her Serbian nationality, and enjoyed a high income, investing in property and a car. Her travels further broadened her horizons, and her career flourished, leading to a promotion to senior manager. Anna's captivating qualities, including her intelligence, beauty, slender physique, and radiant smile, drew in numerous admirers. While working at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she met and fell in love with Marcus O'Neill, the hotel's head chef. Their romance ultimately led to their marriage in 2009, at which point Anna took her husband's last name. Born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, Brian Paul Walsh came from a prominent, wealthy, and respected family. As a young man, he would frequently borrow money from friends, only to fail to repay them. During his college years, he would invite friends to dine at upscale restaurants, then use various tactics to manipulate others into covering his share of the bill. Brian was estranged from his father, Dr. Thomas Walsh, for many years until the elder's death in 2018. The estrangement dated back to when Brian fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from his father's personal account and disappeared with the money. Despite this, Dr. Walsh chose not to report the incident to the police and instead tried to persuade Brian to return the money voluntarily. However, when Brian refused, Dr. Walsh cut off all communication with him. By the time of the theft, Brian's parents had already divorced, and his father had started a new family. In response to Brian's actions, Dr. Walsh decided to remove him from his life and will. After Dr. Walsh's passing, Brian reappeared and filed a lawsuit claiming that the will was forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to deny him his rightful inheritance. However, Brian was unable to prove his claims and received no part of the estate. Those who knew Brian described him as greedy, malevolent, and cruel, with a tendency towards violence and a lack of emotional control. He often relied on force to achieve his goals and became dangerous during bouts of anger. In the late 2000s, Brian received treatment in a psychiatric clinic to address his rage issues, during which he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy. Brian and Anna first met in 2014 when Anna was working as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatle Hotel in Massachusetts. At the time, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who was also employed at the hotel. Brian, who was a guest at the hotel, was immediately drawn to Anna's charm. Despite knowing she was already married, Brian continued to show her increasing attention, which eventually became insistent. Used to getting his way, Brian persisted in pursuing Anna, even after she rejected him. He managed to get her phone number and home address where she lived with her husband and began to harass them relentlessly. In 2015, the Anna were forced to seek police protection from Brian's constant harassment, which continued day and night. Brian would show up at Anna's workplace, call her at home, and send her messages, demanding she leave her husband for him. The situation took a dark turn when Brian threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she didn't comply with his demands. What triggered Anna's change of heart remains unclear, but a year after seeking police protection, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Months later, Brian became her second husband. They settled into a luxurious home in Casson, Massachusetts, an upscale neighborhood about 20 miles southeast of Boston. They had 3 sons in quick succession, with the boys being 2, 4, and 6 years old at the time of Anna's disappearance. Despite having a demanding job, Anna successfully balanced her career with motherhood, never taking maternity leave. She became the regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, earning a high salary and becoming the primary breadwinner for the family. Due to her frequent business trips to Washington, D.C., she also bought a second home in her name, where she stayed during these trips. To help take care of their children during her absences, Anna relied on visiting nannies. Meanwhile, Brian was unemployed while his wife was building their family and advancing her career. He had spent most of the $1 million he had taken from his father, and all of Anna's acquisitions were registered in her name. As a result, Brian was actively searching for ways to generate effortless income. Before marrying Anna, Brian had formed a connection with a wealthy individual in South Korea, whose family possessed an impressive art collection. After returning to the U.S., Brian maintained this connection and was unexpectedly asked by his friend to assist in selling several Andy Warhol paintings. Instead of just earning a commission, Brian decided to profit from the transaction. He gained access to a series of abstract Warhol paintings titled Shadow and appraised each one, obtaining authenticity certificates. Then, he created copies of both the paintings and documents. Brian found artists who could create precise replicas, convincing them he needed backups, since each original was worth around $250,000. For several years, he successfully sold fake paintings as originals to collectors worldwide. However, one buyer, an expert in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and sued Brian. The FBI investigated, and in April 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. He was placed under house arrest after his lawyer negotiated a deal, requiring him to return the proceeds to the buyers and avoid prison time. Brian was under house arrest, but he was allowed to leave his house twice a day for specific activities. He could drive his children to and from school, and had a 2.5-hour window in the morning to visit a limited list of approved places in his neighborhood, such as stores, pharmacies, and dry cleaners, to buy essential items. On December 31st, 2022, Mrs. Anna Walsh mysteriously disappeared. The Walsh family had planned to celebrate New Year's Eve together at home, just the 5 of them, Anna, Brian, and their 3 young sons. After the boys went to bed early, Anna and Brian stayed at the dinner table. That evening, Anna posted a message on social media, wishing everyone a happy new year, and hinting that the past year had been tough, but she and Brian were still together. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but when she failed to show up, her employer Tishman Speyer reported her missing to the police on January 4th. Brian also reported her missing, worried that he hadn't been able to contact her for days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st when she woke him up early in the morning, claiming she had to go to work due to some issues and her boss had asked her to come in earlier than planned. He believed she then headed to the airport with only a few belongings. However, several inconsistencies in the case soon arose. For instance, Anna had not bought, changed, or reserved a flight ticket for January 1st, and she had not canceled her scheduled flight for January 3rd. Additionally, she was not seen at the airport on either January 1st or 3rd. Furthermore, it was unclear how she left the house since her personal car was still in the garage and she had not called a taxi. Brian's suggestion that she might have hitchhiked was not convincing. Brian's statements and behavior sparked numerous questions. His explanations were contradictory, and he didn't appear particularly concerned about the unfolding events. Despite being unable to contact the mother of his children for over 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day, and only after her workplace called. From the start, Mr. Walsh was considered a prime suspect, yet law enforcement didn't have enough evidence to arrest him or obtain a warrant to search their family home. They conducted a limited inspection with the homeowner's permission, but it didn't yield any results. Brian claimed to have led a normal life during those 3 days, visiting usual stores and doing household chores. However, verifying his claims was challenging, as he often left the house without his phone, which he alleged was frequently taken by his older children to play games without his permission. On January 5th, the police issued a public appeal on TV, showing a photo of Anna and asking anyone who knew her whereabouts or what had happened to her to contact the authorities immediately. However, no one came forward with any information. The last time Anna had been in touch with anyone was on December 31st, when she made phone calls to her mother and sister. Her husband was the last person known to have seen her. Surveillance cameras in the neighborhood did not capture any footage of Anna on the morning of January 1st, making it seem as though she had never left her home. In contrast, her husband was recorded leaving and returning to their home several times, but it was impossible to determine where he had gone. His claim of visiting a supermarket was proven to be false, as his vehicle was not seen on any routes to the store, and he was not spotted inside. It wasn't until January 8th that Brian was arrested for making false statements and was taken in for questioning at the police station. His home was finally searched, and it was discovered that on January 1st, he had visited a hardware store in a different area, which was not on the list of approved locations he was allowed to visit while under house arrest. At the hardware store, Brian spent nearly $500 on a large quantity of cleaning supplies, including plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop and bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, likely hoping to keep his visit secret. During a search of the Walsh family home, disturbing discoveries were made. Although the house appeared normal at first, with no signs of struggle or bloodstains, the basement told a different story. Law enforcement officers found smeared bloodstains everywhere, along with a bloodied knife and saw wrapped in towels, hidden among the clutter. Brian had previously admitted to visiting his mother's home on January 3rd, claiming he needed to help her with household tasks due to her poor health. However, after the grim discoveries in the basement, police suspected that Walsh may have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body on his way there. They inspected trash bins in the area where the couple lived, as well as along the road to his mother's house, and found a kitchen hatchet with dried blood and several blood-stained towels, similar to those found in the Walsh basement. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood in the basement on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to Anna, confirming her death. The seized laptop and tablet revealed a disturbing search history. Weeks prior to his wife's disappearance, Brian had been actively searching online for information on the most favorable states for divorce in terms of property division. He also looked into whether he could claim the second home in Washington, D.C., which was owned by Anna and registered solely in her name, suggesting a possible motive for the crime. One of the earliest searches, made around 4 a.m. on January 1st, was about how long it takes for a body to decompose. This was followed by nearly 24 searches on how to dispose of a body, including how to clean up blood traces, how to dismember a body, and whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed. He also searched for information on how long DNA traces last and whether a person could be charged with a crime if the body was never found. All of these searches were conducted on his young child's tablet. By January 3rd, Brian's searches had shifted to inheritance, as he looked into how and when someone can inherit the property of a person who has disappeared. This suggests that he was confident he would avoid punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. On January 18th, Brian was officially accused of murdering his wife, even though her body or remains had not been discovered. Prosecutors allege that on New Year's Day, Brian intentionally or accidentally killed his wife, then decided to get rid of her body by dismembering it in their home's basement. He allegedly put the body parts in plastic bags and threw them away in trash cans located in different areas of the city. The areas surrounding the Walsh home, as well as nearby empty lands, wooded areas, and bodies of water, were extensively searched for evidence, but nothing was found. The defendant, Brian Walsh, has pleaded not guilty and is refusing to reveal what happened to Anna's body. Recently, Anna had been unhappy and was considering divorcing her husband, which she mentioned several times during phone calls with her mother and sister the day before she vanished. However, her mother did not take Anna's threats seriously and decided to put off her visit. The trial is ongoing, and Brian is being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility as he awaits his next court date. Anna's mother is following the investigation from her home in Serbia and has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the New York consulate, which is in touch with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure Anna's mother is kept informed about the investigation and hearings. Brian and Anna's 3 sons are now in state custody because none of Brian's family members are willing to care for them. They cite Anna's mother's age and poor health, and her sister, who lives in Canada, has also declined to take in her nephews. The only person willing to take the boys in is Pamela Bond, a close friend of Anna's, who prefers this to them being separated and placed in different foster homes. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Brianna Marie Schneller. Brianna Marie Schneller was an 18-year-old with a vibrant personality who loved Mexican food, music, dancing, and roller coasters. She was an exceptional student and ranking as the top student at Everest High School in Washington, according to her parents, Craig and Lori Schneller. Brianna had a promising future ahead, with a trip to Tennessee planned for the summer and a notable achievement as the only student in Wisconsin to qualify for a national competition in professional and technical fields. Brianna's passion was to pursue a career in restaurant management and eventually start her own business in the food service industry. To gain experience and skills, she worked part-time at El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain. Those who knew her, including friends, colleagues, and customers, described her as kind and responsive. Brianna's life was on the verge of 2 major events: her graduation and her wedding to her 22-year-old fiancé, Sebastian Ramirez. Brianna's parents initially disapproved of her relationship with Sebastian due to their age difference and concerns that she was growing up too quickly. However, after getting to know Sebastian better, they began to trust him and saw that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious plans for their future together. They eventually moved in together, sharing an apartment on 12th Avenue in WoW with Sebastian's 19-year-old younger brother, Hugo. To outsiders, it seemed like the 3 of them got along well and lived harmoniously, burning the envy of many for their close friendship. Sebastian and Hugo supported Brianna's interests and also worked with her at a local restaurant called El Tequila Salsa. It's likely that this is where Sebastian and Brianna first met. Despite their seemingly perfect life, tragedy struck on May 2, 2009. The day began like any other, with Sebastian waking up early and trying not to disturb Brianna, who was still sleeping peacefully beside him. It was a day off from school, and she had no reason to wake up early. Brianna woke up while her boyfriend was in the shower. They exchanged affectionate greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to rouse Hugo, who had returned home early that morning after a late-night party. Hugo was clearly hungover. After Sebastian left for work, which was just a short walk away, his younger brother followed suit. Brianna was left alone in the apartment. Later, Hugo was feeling unwell. His hangover was severe, and he was struggling to concentrate. He decided to take an early lunch break and headed home to rest. When he arrived at the apartment, everything seemed normal at first. However, as he entered his brother's room, he noticed that it was in disarray. Brianna was lying on the floor, unresponsive. Hugo rushed to her side and asked what was wrong, but she didn't answer. At first, he didn't notice the blood. Hugo discovered a horrific scene when he removed a towel covering a woman's face. Her severe injuries had left Hugo almost unrecognizable, and he was utterly shocked and overcome with grief at the sight of her. Despite his distress, he knew he had to act quickly and ran to his neighbor's apartment on the floor below for help. The neighbor, a woman, called emergency services at 1:30 p.m., who was too distraught to speak clearly. The emergency operator received the call and was told that she was the girlfriend of Sebastian. She was lying on the floor, severely injured with cuts all over her body and a badly disfigured face. The operator was informed that she showed no signs of life. Police and paramedics rushed to the apartment building after receiving a call. When they arrived, they found a crowded parking lot, but one person stood out, Hugo Ramirez. He approached the officers and led them to the apartment where the incident occurred. Inside, they found a disturbing scene. Brianna's body was severely injured, with deep stab wounds on her chest, neck, and wrist. Hugo was visibly shaken and could barely speak as he led officers to the apartment. He simply pointed to Brianna's body, and the officers took note of the scene. The officers asked Hugo to leave the room so that forensic specialists could begin their examination. The specialists observed that the blood on the floor had already started to dry, suggesting that Brianna's body had been there for some time. It was clear that she had tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the attacker had overpowered her, leaving behind a crime scene with a significant amount of evidence. The forensic team found several key pieces of evidence, including a bloody iron on the floor, which appeared to have been used to strike Brianna's face. The iron was broken, with pieces scattered nearby. 2 knives were found in the bathroom sink, one of which was missing its sharp tip. Blood was also found on the soap, suggesting that the attacker had washed their hands after the crime. However, the most notable piece of evidence was a bloodied shoe print on the carpet, which drew the investigators' attention. The investigation of the house uncovered many new details. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim may have known her attacker or that the perpetrator had a way to enter the apartment without breaking in. Additionally, a large sum of money was found scattered throughout the apartment, consisting of bills ranging from $1 to $20. According to Hugo, this money was comprised of tips they had accumulated at work, which were carelessly left lying around. At first glance, it appeared that nothing was missing from the apartment, indicating that the attack was not motivated by robbery. This theory was further supported by the discovery of a broken knife tip in the victim's body. The fact that the knife broke during the attack indicates that the perpetrator applied considerable force. It's crucial to grasp what may have motivated someone to hold such intense feelings of anger and aggression against she. Uncovering the cause of this brutal and unprecedented attack is crucial in shedding light on the matter. Craig and Laura Schneller anxiously waited at the police station, having heard that something terrible had happened at their daughter's home. Unfortunately, they had been unable to contact Brianna, and their hearts were heavy with worry. The officers had to tell the parents Brianna that their worst fears had come true. The news was devastating. Their daughter, Brianna, had passed away. The loss of a child is one of the greatest sorrows a parent can experience, and for the Schnellers, it was a life-altering moment. To confirm the identity, the authorities showed them photographs of Brianna, but only those that clearly showed her face, as some of the other images were too graphic. After confirming the tragic news, the Schnellers were in shock. With the help of a psychologist, they were able to compose themselves and answer questions from the police. They were eager to assist in the investigation and help catch the person responsible. The Schnellers provided as much information as they could about their daughter's life, but they insisted that she had no known enemies. They also revealed that Brianna's mother had been the last person she had spoken to that morning. Her mother, Craig, took Brianna's car to the repair shop and messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to let her know. Brianna replied to the message. The investigation shows that the tragedy occurred at a point in time that was after they sent messages to each other and before Hugo's arrival. As part of their inquiry, detectives first interviewed the Ramirez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, questioning them separately. Sebastian, Brianna's fiancé, stated that he woke up at 9:15 a.m., had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke up his brother, Hugo. Around 10:15 a.m. Sebastian claimed he was already at the restaurant when he received a phone call informing him about the incident. Hugo's account corroborated Sebastian's, saying he left the house around 10:15 a.m., shortly after his brother. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. due to feeling unwell and wanting to rest. When Hugo found Brianna's body, his reported illness and fatigue vanished almost instantly. The events that followed were a daze. He was so shocked that he couldn't think clearly about how to respond. His mind went blank, and his hands shook uncontrollably, prompting him to seek help from a neighbor. The Ramirez brothers' accounts were believable, and their distress seemed authentic. Nevertheless, the police had seen convincing performances before, so they needed concrete evidence to confirm their innocence. It was possible that one of the brothers was involved in the crime, and the other was covering for him. To investigate this, detectives asked about their relationships with each other. Sebastian expressed his love for Brianna and his excitement for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was questioned about whether he had any issues with Brianna or if they had argued, but he denied it. Hugo also explained that while he found her attractive and charming, he had no romantic intentions towards her because he valued his good relationship with his brother and would never jeopardize his happiness. Brianna was like a sister to Hugo. And after hours of questioning, neither Hugo nor Sebastian raised any suspicions. The police took DNA samples from the brothers and allowed them to return home. To verify the brothers' alibis, detectives spoke with employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the restaurant's security footage. The brothers' accounts checked out, and the possibility of a domestic-related crime was ruled out. The investigation continued, and the question remained, who could have committed such a heinous crime against an innocent young woman? Was there a predator lurking in the city who had been watching Brianna and waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The police considered this possibility as they analyzed the evidence. The autopsy results confirmed the police's initial suspicions. The sequence of events was reconstructed as follows. Brianna was first hit on the head with a blunt object, likely an iron, which caused a severe injury. The perpetrator then cut her throat and inflicted multiple stab wounds to her body. The attack was extremely violent, with so many wounds that even experts couldn't count them all. At least 2 of the injuries were fatal. DNA from an unknown source was found under Brianna's fingernails, indicating that she struggled and resisted her attacker. Initial reports that nothing was missing from Brianna's home were later found to be incorrect. Brianna's phone had actually been taken, and Sebastian was the one who discovered its loss and informed the detectives. This new information became a crucial lead in the investigation. The police learned from the phone provider that the phone was still active and obtained its location. Surprisingly, the phone was found to be nearby, specifically on the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. This revelation added complexity to the case, given the brothers' solid alibi and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the missing phone. The detectives rushed to the location and found that the phone's coordinates led them to the parking lot of a shopping center that housed the restaurant. A search of the area revealed that the phone was likely in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found in a container. Inside the bag were the victim's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves had a blood stain. The bag and its contents were sent to the lab for further analysis, which could potentially yield fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. After seeing a photo of the bag's contents, Sebastian identified his girlfriend's underwear. The police then questioned the restaurant staff multiple times. On May 5th, they asked everyone to provide a DNA sample and checked for any scratches or injuries. They also carefully reviewed all the surveillance footage, both inside and outside the building and nearby businesses. The police had a challenging task to figure out who had thrown away the bag. A kitchen worker initially caught the investigators' attention because he arrived late to work after Brianna had already been found lifeless. However, he had a solid alibi. He had been pulled over for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Reviewing the security footage was crucial to the investigation, which led them to another suspect, Raul Ponce Rocha, the 24-year-old kitchen manager. On the day of the crime, Raul left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned 35 minutes later, at 10:53 a.m., without it. When questioned, Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant, who lived in the same building as Brianna and her colleagues. Raul claimed the trip took about 20 minutes, but there was a 15-minute gap in his timeline that he refused to explain. Luciano corroborated Raul's story, stating they drove straight to work without stopping. Nevertheless, the detectives remained skeptical about the unaccounted 15 minutes and Raul's suspicious behavior. Raul Ponce Rocha, the manager of El Tequila Salsa, had raised suspicions due to the cuts on his hands, which he claimed were from working with knives. However, there was not enough evidence to detain him at that point. Further investigation revealed that on May 2nd at 1:16 p.m., a single employee had exited the back door of the restaurant, and at the same time, only one person had approached the trash bins. This led to the quick identification of the suspect, who was surprisingly Raul Ponce Rocha, not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez as initially suspected. A search warrant was obtained for Raul's home, and the search uncovered some peculiar items. Under his mattress, investigators found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos, a brown hoodie, and a glove similar to the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag, and a strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. All the evidence pointed to Brianna. It was only a matter of time before the test results confirmed the match. Raul was eventually arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. Sebastian was stunned when he learned that a suspect had been identified in the brutal crime. He had trouble believing that his co-worker, Raul Ponce Rocha, could be capable of such a heinous act. What motivated Raul to commit this crime, especially since he barely knew Brianna? Sebastian's impression of Raul was that he was a friendly and harmless person. The mystery began to unravel in 2011 when Raul stood trial. Despite a lengthy investigation, Raul consistently denied any involvement in the crime and never admitted guilt. However, the prosecution presented strong evidence that contradicted his claims. Raul's DNA was found on several key pieces of evidence, including the iron, knives, a plastic bag, and its contents, as well as under Brianna's fingernails. A shoe print at the crime scene also matched Raul's shoes. The evidence pieced together the events of May 2, 2009. On his way to work that day, Raul passed by Brianna's house, a place that had long fascinated him. Assuming she was out, since her car was not in the driveway, he took advantage of the opportunity to break into her apartment and take what he wanted. Raul had a disturbing habit of collecting women's underwear, with evidence found hidden under his mattress. On the day of the incident, Raul left work, supposedly to pick up his friend Luciano, but instead entered Brianna's apartment without warning. He easily gained entry, suggesting he may have had a key, and went directly to Brianna's room, where he began rummaging through her belongings. When Brianna confronted him, Raul was likely caught off guard and feared being recognized. Panicked, he grabbed the nearest object, an iron, and used it to strike her. He then escalated the violence by slashing her throat with a knife and inflicting multiple other injuries. The investigation found that the killer appeared to take pleasure in the brutal act, as evidenced by the numerous and excessive wounds inflicted on the victim. The attacker also used multiple knives during the assault. After committing the crime, Raul attempted to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, which was likely stained with blood. He then calmly returned to work, pretending nothing had happened, and drove Luciano to the restaurant as planned. Raul took advantage of the lunch break to dispose of the evidence bag in a trash bin, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. Before the trial, Raul admitted to meeting with Brianna but claimed he didn't kill her. However, he suspected someone else might have and named a former restaurant employee. Raul stated that he saw this acquaintance, Sergio, at Brianna's house on the day she died. This confirmed that Raul had indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when Raul left, Sergio stayed behind and had an argument with Brianna. Raul's statement raised more questions and led to further investigations. The authorities verified the information and managed to contact Sergio, who was abroad at the time. Sergio appeared at the trial and testified that he was not involved in Brianna's death. He proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime, as he had left weeks earlier to care for his ill father in Mexico. It became clear that Raul had hoped to falsely accuse Sergio and create doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed, and Raul's actions showed that he had no qualms about accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime, and he felt no remorse for his actions. The trial of Raul Ponce Rocha drew a large crowd, including Brianna's family members and her friends Sebastian and Hugo. The young men struggled to keep their emotions in check, prompting officers to intervene multiple times to restore calm. In the end, Raul was found guilty of murdering Brianna Schneller and burglary, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at a correctional facility in Wisconsin. After the verdict, Brianna's father expressed his gratitude that justice had been served. He shared that he still keeps a Father's Day card Brianna gave him and cherishes every memory of her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marcos Matsunaga. Marcos Matsunaga was a successful Brazilian entrepreneur who inherited a family business that became one of the largest food product companies in the country. The company, Yoki, was founded by his grandfather, Yashizo Cadano, who immigrated to Brazil and started a small flour milling business in the mid-20th century. Over time, the company grew and transformed into a global brand with a wide range of products. Marcos was born into a wealthy family and was accustomed to getting everything he wanted from a young age. Marcos didn't have to start from scratch to build his business, as he inherited the family food company from his grandfather and father. As the CEO, Marcos had the opportunity to become the first billionaire in his family, a goal he pursued for most of his life. However, this ambition was not meant to be fulfilled. Those who knew Marcos personally described him as a skilled and successful businessman who not only preserved but also significantly increased the family's wealth, boosting profits. However, he was also known for being difficult to work with, having a strong personality, and being controlling towards those around him. Marcos was not handsome, he was obese since childhood. He had to wear glasses due to vision problems, short stature, and somewhat clumsy. All of these caused Marcos a lot of problems when communicating with friends, leading to a lack of friends and isolation. Despite his wealth and business success, Marcos found it difficult to establish a meaningful relationship. His arrogance and egoism often repelled women, making it hard for him to connect with someone beyond a few dates. Consequently, he frequently relied on the services of escorts, as his wealth and status were not enough to make him a desirable partner. Very little information is publicly available about the entrepreneur's first wife. What is known is that their marriage was not based on romance or passion, but rather necessity and family pressure. The marriage endured for several years, although both spouses soon came to regret their decision to start a family. Initially, the young wife tried to accommodate her husband's complicated personality, hoping they would eventually form a supportive and loving partnership. However, her expectations were unfulfilled, and they gradually grew further apart. The businessmen primarily sought companionship on websites where women offered intimate services in exchange for money. Elise was one of these women, a call girl with profiles on multiple platforms. He came across her profile, a gorgeous blonde with a great figure, and began booking her services regularly, paying her handsomely for their time together. Elise was 6 years younger than him. She grew up in a poor and troubled home in a crime-ridden part of the city. Her family life was unstable, she never knew her father, her mother struggled with addiction, and her mother's partners often had similar issues. As a result, Eliza's childhood was marked by hardship and unhappiness. She was frequently beaten, harassed, and abused by her mother's partners from a young age. As soon as she finished school, Elise left home and never looked back. She pursued a career in nursing, landing a job at a hospice after completing her training. However, she soon realized that caring for terminally ill patients was not her true calling. Elise formed strong bonds with her patients. A few years later, Elise decided to pursue higher education and switch careers. She chose law, which she saw as a promising field that would open doors to new opportunities. After lengthy preparation, she scored well enough on the entrance exams to gain admission. However, she struggled to pay tuition fees with her limited income as a nurse. Since Elise had no family support, having cut off ties with her relatives after leaving home, she had to fend for herself. To make money, she decided to take advantage of her appearance. She registered on a website that provided intimate services, where she was helped to create an attractive profile. Soon, wealthy customers began to notice Eliza's beauty. Elise worked as an escort to finance her studies and support herself. Once she completed her education and secured a job in her field, she planned to leave the sex work industry. That's when she met Marcos, a regular client who showered her with gifts and openly met with her. Unbeknownst to Elise, their relationship would take a dramatic turn. Marcos, a wealthy married man, would eventually leave his wife for Elise, transforming her rags-to-riches story into a real-life fairy tale. Marcos completely lost himself over Elise, but it's unclear whether Elise actively pursued him or not. After about 6 months, Marcos realized he didn't just want to date Elise, but to be with her long-term. Without hesitation, he filed for divorce from his first wife and began introducing Elise as his fiancée to everyone. Marcos, as a businessman, preferred to keep the true nature of their relationship and Eliza's occupation private. So, they came up with a cover story, claiming they met by chance at a cafe. They stuck to this story, even with Marcos's closest relatives and friends, who remained none the wiser. When Elise joined the Matsunaga family, she didn't exactly receive a warm welcome. Her in-laws suspected that she had used her charm to win over Marcos, an older, wealthy, but not particularly attractive man. They believed she was now pretending to ignore his abrasive personality in order to secure her new status. Despite their reservations, no one strongly opposed Marcos's decision to divorce his first wife and marry Elise. A lavish, traditional wedding was planned, complete with a white wedding dress, numerous guests, and a multi-tiered cake. Afterwards, Marcos moved his new wife into his grand, luxurious mansion, where she became the lady of the house. Matsunaga was a well-known collector of luxury items, particularly expensive wines and rare weapons. His house featured a large wine cellar, where bottles were meticulously organized by year and country of origin. Additionally, the house had a secret room dedicated to his collection of firearms and edged weapons, which were proudly displayed on the walls from floor to ceiling. Marcos took great pride in his extensive collections and was always on the lookout for new additions. His home was a treasure trove of antiques, luxury items, and modern art, which were displayed throughout the house, often in a way that was more cluttered than curated. Soon after the wedding, they decided that they were ready to have an heir, but despite all their efforts, Elise did not get pregnant naturally. Then they decided to resort to the procedure of in vitro fertilization, but even here, success awaited them far from immediately. However, when their daughter was finally born, their joy knew no bounds. They devoted themselves to raising their child, making plans for her future, and as she grew older, the family began to travel the world, immersing themselves in different cultures and traditions. Their daughter was a beloved and pampered child, raised with love, care, and every luxury imaginable. When Elise entered his life, she surprised him by showing a willingness to learn about hunting. Together, they visited shooting ranges, where she became proficient in handling firearms. Eventually, they ventured into the woods to hunt wild animals. Elise approached hunting as a competitive challenge, unfazed by the act of taking animal lives. Marcos appreciated her mindset and enjoyed watching her skillfully wield her weapons and stalk prey. Marcos taught Elise various outdoor skills, including how to skin and carve wild animals such as boars, deer, and other forest creatures. Together, they would dissect the animals using large knives, cleavers, and axes to separate the body parts. Unconventionally, the family did not keep traditional pets like cats or dogs. Instead, they kept poisonous snakes in specially designed terrariums that mimicked their natural habitats. This was a long-held dream of Marcos, who had a passion for snakes, but his first wife had never approved of the idea of having a terrarium in their home. Elise had successfully adopted Marcos's unusual hobbies, which had grown on Elise. In the spring of 2012, Marcos was on the verge of making a significant deal that would take his wealth and career to a new level, potentially making him a billionaire. He was in active negotiations with several partners to sell the family business and invest the substantial proceeds in a new and profitable venture. On May 19, 2012, the day before a billion-dollar deal was set to close, entrepreneur Marcos vanished without warning. His wife, Elise, didn't report him missing until the next day because she thought he was at work. According to Elise, Marcos had a meeting scheduled for the evening that was expected to run late into the night. He had packed some belongings and told her he would likely spend the night at the office before heading straight to the deal the next morning. When Marcos failed to return home and stopped answering his phone the next day, Elise grew concerned and reported him missing. The police quickly discovered that the entrepreneur had missed an evening meeting and a crucial morning meeting that he couldn't afford to skip. This led to immediate speculation that the millionaire had been kidnapped, and it was likely that his family would receive ransom demands in the coming hours. However, 24 hours passed, followed by another day, with no ransom demands received. As a result, hopes of finding Marcos alive began to dwindle. Meanwhile, Investigators were actively questioning the businessman's relatives, friends, and business partners to identify potential enemies and determine who could benefit from his disappearance or the disruption of the impending deal. Despite a thorough investigation, no one has found anyone who would have wanted to kill Marcos. He was a capable and forward-thinking businessman who made strategic decisions that often benefited everyone involved. Days later, Elise visited her in-laws with her daughter and revealed a secret she had been too afraid to share with the police. With tears in her eyes, she explained that her husband had been having an affair with a woman named Natasha Villalima and had made no effort to hide it. Although the situation had led to several heated arguments and threats of divorce, Marcos had eventually promised to end the affair in order to save their family. Marcos continued to see Natasha, but was more cautious to avoid another family scandal. However, Elise suspected he was having an affair and hired a private investigator to gather evidence. The investigator obtained photos and videos of Marcos's romantic dates with Natasha. Notably, he took Natasha to the same restaurants and entertainment venues that he and his wife frequented, where he was very popular. It seemed that Marcos was deliberately showing his disdain for his wife and openly cheating on her without any attempt to hide it. It was later discovered that Natasha Lima was found on the same intimate services website where Marcos first met his wife, Elise. They dated for about 5 months, during which time he showered her with expensive gifts, including a luxury car, and paid her a large sum of money to delete her online profile. Meanwhile, Elise discovered incriminating photos and videos of Marcos's infidelity and showed them to his parents. She also revealed that she had confronted Marcos with the evidence just a day before his disappearance, but instead of apologizing, he abruptly packed his things, informed Elise that he was leaving her, and disappeared without a word. According to Elise, Marcos had simply given in to his passion and abandoned his life to be with his new mistress. However, those who knew him best vehemently disagreed, insisting that Marcos would never abandon his business, which his family had spent decades building, as he was deeply invested in its success. A gruesome discovery was made by a passerby about a week later, when scattered garbage bags were found in a remote area approximately 100 kilometers from the missing Marcos's house. Upon examination of the bags, police discovered human remains which were identified as Marcos Matsunaga, a person for whom an extensive national search was ongoing. Forensic examination concluded the victim had died as a result of a shot to the head before the perpetrator cut and packaged his dismembered remains. Expert assessment also inferred that only an exceptionally skilled practitioner would possess sufficient know-how, steady-handedly controlling either precise butcher's cut tools at convenient knife handles anatomy. The investigation began by reviewing the last known location of the deceased man, Marcos. This led authorities to the luxury residential complex where Marcos lived with his wife and daughter. The complex was equipped with multiple security cameras, which were thoroughly examined. A review of the footage revealed that the evening before Marcos disappeared, he and his wife had ordered food delivery. The elevator camera captured Marcos going down to the first floor to collect the food, returning with pizza boxes in hand. He then entered his apartment and was not seen leaving again that evening, night, or the following day. It appeared as though Marcos vanished into thin air. Elise leaves their apartment with 3 large, heavy suitcases. Investigators, who already had suspicions, take her into custody for questioning. At first, she denies any involvement in her husband's disappearance, sticking to her initial claim that he left her for another woman. However, when shown footage of her moving the suitcases, she breaks down and confesses. According to her, their marriage had been troubled for some time, and her husband had become increasingly abusive. Marcos would constantly humiliate her, criticize her for her past work as an escort, and claimed that she was a bad mother to their daughter. Marcos exerted total control over his wife Elise, not even allowing her to make friends. When she once mentioned divorce, Marcos threatened to leave her with nothing, take their child, and prevent her from seeing him. On the evening of the incident, Elias showed Marcos pictures from a detective, which depicted him with his mistress. Instead of remorse, Marcos became enraged and slapped Elias. She claims that everything after that was a blur. The next thing Elias remembers is holding a gun, which she used to shoot her husband. Upon realizing what had happened, she decided to dispose of the body to make it seem like Marcos had vanished. Elias drew upon her experience as a nurse and knowledge of human anatomy to do so. Additionally, Marcos had previously taught her how to skin and dismember animal carcasses, and they had the necessary tools at home. After Elias killed her husband, she dismembered and bagged his body while their young daughter slept in the next room. It was later discovered that the evidence of her husband's infidelity, which included photos and videos, was only received by Elias on May 20th, after she had already murdered him. This evidence was provided by a private detective. Elias then used this evidence to deceive her husband's parents, telling them that he had abandoned her for his mistress. The investigation also found Natasha Lima, who testified in court that Marcos had wanted a divorce but was afraid of Elias due to her alleged mental instability and capability for violent behavior. Natasha last saw her lover the day before he disappeared. He was unhappy about the constant family scandals and planned to start a new life in Florida after selling the company. However, his wife Elias was not part of these plans. He intended to divorce her and forget her completely. A shocking twist was the discovery of blood in the lungs of the deceased Marcos. This suggested that Marcos was still alive when Elias decapitated him, indicating he had struggled to breathe. This contradicted Elias's claim that he died instantly from a gunshot wound. Further examination by the pathologist revealed that the bullet had entered Marcos's head at an unusual angle. It seemed he was caught off guard, sitting or lying down when shot, and didn't try to defend himself. Elias Matsunaga's claim that her husband attacked her and she defended herself was disputed by multiple witnesses at her trial. They testified that Marcos had a difficult personality and often spoke harshly, but he never physically harmed anyone. As a result, the court believed Elias fabricated the story and found her guilty of premeditated murder with cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. She received a 20-year prison sentence, which many considered too lenient. Her in-laws now care for their daughter. Back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing Shi and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked Shi, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet, He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful, and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako, and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored, and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send the medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to she's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen she before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 10 years old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sumner family. Carol and Reggie Sumner raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were born in the same year, went to the same school, and were even in the same grade. Over time, their childhood friendship blossomed into a deeper affection. Neither of them recalls exactly when they began to develop romantic feelings for each other, but by the time they were 15 years old in 1959, they were dating. Their friends described them as a beautiful and harmonious couple. Reggie and Carol treasured their memories, keeping photos of their happy times together in their home archives. At the time, it seemed like they had their whole lives ahead of them, and they looked forward to a long and happy future together. Their feelings for each other were strong and mutual, and they were practically inseparable both in and out of school. They even started making plans to get married as soon as they turned 18. With the full support of their parents. In 1962, Reggie and Carol, a young couple, graduated from high school. However, their plans to get married were put on hold when Reggie was drafted into the army a few months later. They decided to postpone their wedding until Reggie returned from his military service and made a promise to write each other regularly. As time passed, the separation took its toll. Reggie was deployed to Vietnam. Unfortunately, Carol lost contact with him, and she didn't even know if he was still alive. Despite the uncertainty, Carol continued her education and started working at the Charleston Air Force Base. A few years later, Carol got married, but the marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. They didn't have any children together. In 1975, Carol married again, this time to Richard Alford, and gave birth to their daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. However, this marriage was also troubled, as Richard was abusive and had a drinking problem. The situation became unbearable for Carol, and by the mid-1980s, she couldn't take the abuse anymore. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard refused to leave her alone and continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, Richard purchased a handgun and ammunition. After a night of heavy drinking, he went to his ex-wife Carol's home, intending to confront her. When Carol answered the door, their 10-year-old daughter Rhonda was present in the room. However, the presence of his child did not deter Richard, who was intoxicated. He pulled out the gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. Richard then drove to a secluded area, where he fired the remaining bullet into his temple, taking his own life. Carol was fortunate to survive the shooting due to the prompt response of neighbors, who heard the gunshots and Rhonda's cries for help. They called the police and an ambulance, which rushed Carol to the hospital. Carol's condition was critical, and she underwent several complex surgeries and blood transfusions. Although she eventually recovered, she suffered significant injuries, including complete blindness in her right eye and permanent disability. Years later, in the late 1990s, Carol's health began to deteriorate again. She experienced severe pain, weight loss, and weakness. After a thorough examination at the hospital, she received a devastating diagnosis: liver cancer. Tragically, as a result of being severely injured by gunshot wounds, Carol lost her position on an Air Force base. With cancer added to her medical complications, she found that physical strain, prolonged periods on her feet, and any heavy physical exertion exceeded her capability. Given these medical constraints, Carol then decided to re-enter the workforce as a call center operator for a cable television provider within her hometown, Charleston. Reggie was in Vietnam for a long time, and due to the prolonged war, he was severely wounded and nearly lost his leg. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and during this period, his name was mistakenly listed among the dead. As a result, his relatives believed he had passed away. Reggie was fortunate to survive and eventually returned home. However, by then, he had lost touch with his former lover, Carol, who had moved to a different location, got married, and also assumed Reggie had died in the war. Years later, Reggie got married, but his war injuries led to the development of diabetes and other chronic diseases. He was never able to become a father, and eventually, his marriage ended in separation. Since then, he has lived alone. Reggie found work as a laborer at the local railroad and no longer expected any pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, Carol was having a typical day at work, answering phones and advising customers. When she picked up another call, she was shocked to hear a voice that sent shivers down her spine. It was a voice she knew all too well, her first high school love, Reggie. However, she was hesitant to respond, as she had thought Reggie was dead. After answering the customer's questions, Carol mustered up the courage to say Reggie's full name out loud. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Reggie's timid question. Carol burst into tears, revealing that she was he had dated in high school, the one he had once wanted to marry. For several minutes, they both cried, unable to speak. Eventually, they composed themselves and discovered that they still lived in their hometown. They agreed to meet the next evening, reuniting after all these years. The next day, Carol spent hours getting ready for the date, trying on different dresses and perfecting her hair and makeup. As she looked in the mirror, she was reminded that time had changed her. She was no longer the young, vibrant woman Reggie remembered from the past. Still, she was eager to win him over once more. Their meeting was thrilling for both, having spent decades apart, and their conversation was unrelenting as they recounted stories from their lives, both happy and sorrowful, covering their previous marriages. Professional triumphs, struggles, health challenges, and basking in nostalgia as they reflected on their lost romance and first true love for one another. Reggie and Carol were determined to make the most of their reunion after a period of separation. They quickly fell into a routine of spending every day together, and within a couple of weeks, they decided to take the next step by moving in together. Just 5 months later, they got married, and Carol joined her husband in his home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. As they settled into family life, they initially resided in their hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. They were deeply in love, happy, and enthusiastic about building a life together. However, they faced some challenges, particularly with their health, as they were both still young but struggling with health issues. One of the neighbors who lived nearby was the Cole family, with whom Reggie had a long-standing acquaintance. The patriarch of the family, Stephen, had experienced firsthand the traumatic effects of the Vietnam War. Sustaining severe wounds during combat had resulted in confinement to a wheelchair for many years. His wife, Natalie, often prioritized her social life, spending time with friends at bars after work, instead of rushing home to take care of her family. As a result, their daughter, Tiffany, found herself frequently neglected and left unattended from a young age. Tiffany's situation improved slightly when she befriended the new neighbors, Reggie and Carol. During this time, Tiffany was still in high school, and the compassionate Carol took an instant liking to she. Carol felt genuine sympathy for Tiffany. For 5 years, Carol did her best to support and care for Tiffany, sometimes sponsoring cozy family meals, buying Tiffany clothes, and sharing enough allowance. Carol treated Tiffany like a daughter, showering her with love, care, and attention. When the Carol and Reggie decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan in 2004, Tiffany asked to buy it from them on an installment plan, as she desperately needed a car but had no money. They kindly offered to sell it to her for a minimal amount, which they divided into 12 monthly payments. In early 2005, Carol and Reggie made a difficult decision to leave their home and relocate to Florida. Their health had begun to decline significantly, and doctors advised them to move to a warmer climate with ocean access. Since Carol and Reggie were both retired, they decided to make a big change and start over. Carol and Reggie sold their large home in Charleston and bought a new place in Jacksonville, Florida. They also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. They was very happy and settled into their new life, making plans for their future together. Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda every day to share her thoughts, plans, and daily experiences. However, in June 2005, Rhonda was surprised and concerned when her mother didn't call her as usual. At first, Rhonda tried to brush off her worries, hoping that everything was fine with her parents and that they would call her back soon. But when the next day passed without hearing from them, Rhonda's concern grew. She tried calling her parents' cell phones every 30 minutes, but they were now out of service. She also left messages on their home phone, but none of them were returned. Rhonda set out on a solo road trip to check on her mother and stepfather in another state. After a 5-hour drive, she arrived at their house. What struck her as unusual was the absence of a car in the driveway. Things only got stranger from there. As she approached the front door, she found it slightly ajar, an eerie quietness, and a light on in one of the rooms despite the bright sunlight outside. Rhonda called out for her mother and stepfather Reggie, but received no response. She ventured into the kitchen, where she was greeted by a scene that looked like a sudden and mysterious departure. A table was set for two, with food that appeared to have been left untouched for days. The rest of the house was also in disarray, with belongings scattered about and doors and cupboards left open. Adding to the sense of abandonment and unease, their bedroom showed signs of a thorough search, but it was unclear what the person was looking for or who was responsible. On the bedside table, essential medications were left behind, including her mother's cancer pills, which she took 3 times a day, and Reggie's insulin, which he administered hourly. Notably, their cell phones were completely out of battery, rendering them useless. Rhonda quickly realized that her mother and stepfather were unable to leave their home without their essential medications and cell phones. She immediately contacted the police to report the incident, alerting them to the suspicious individuals. They in the car was quickly added to the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and Reggie were frozen. The first few days of the search yielded nothing, with no sign of the imposters or any witnesses. However, on June 12, several developments led the police to close in on the perpetrators. A crucial lead emerged when a man, claiming to be Reggie, contacted one of the banks, complaining that his card was blocked and he was unable to withdraw cash. A bank employee grew suspicious when checking the card information and offered to resolve the issue by visiting a nearby branch, but the caller, Mr. Reggie, hung up. Minutes later, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carroll, and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When the bank asked her to visit a branch in person, she refused, citing health issues, and urgently requested access to her savings. Her request was denied. The bank promptly handed over the call details and recordings to the police. The police investigation continued at the station, where they played the suspicious phone calls for Rhonda. She immediately confirmed that the voices did not belong to her Carol and Reggie. In fact, the voices sounded too young to be them. As a result, the authorities believed that the imposters were likely involved in the Carol and Reggie disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after extracting information about their bank accounts and cards. The search for the missing couple led to a breakthrough a few days later, when their car was discovered abandoned on a remote road in a wooded area. A thorough examination of the vehicle revealed no signs of blood or struggle in the cabin. However, in the trunk, experts found hair and sweat marks that belonged to they. This suggested that they had been forcibly taken away in the trunk of their own car, leaving little hope for their safe return. The police investigated their bank transactions and found that money had been withdrawn from their account several times after they stopped hearing from their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage revealed that the withdrawals were made by a young man who couldn't be identified right away. The police also requested a trace of all calls made from the phone number used by the imposters to contact the bank. Further investigation showed that the SIM card used to make those calls was purchased on a prepaid plan just before they disappeared. Unfortunately, the buyer's identity couldn't be determined, but it was discovered that the number was used to call a car rental company on June 6. Additionally, it was found that someone staying at a hotel had rented a Mazda RX-8 in the name of Tiffany Cole. Later, the same car was seen at the ATMs where the unidentified young man withdrew money from their accounts. A team of investigators used tracking beacons installed in rental cars to locate a Mazda RX-8, which was found parked at a hotel in Charleston. The car was linked to a couple who had been victimized by thieves, who had withdrawn $1,000 from her card and nearly $3,000 from her husband's card. A capture team was quickly dispatched to the hotel, where they burst into the room where the thieves were staying. The room was found to be filled with numerous packages and receipts from various stores, indicating that the thieves had been on a spending spree, purchasing items such as clothing, electronics, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive liquor. 3 people were found inside the location, clearly caught off guard by the police visit. Tiffany Cole, 23, her boyfriend Michael Jackson, 24, and Alan Lindell Wade, 19, all appeared surprised, confused, and frightened as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. The trio was taken to the police station, separated into different rooms for questioning, and initially pretended to be unaware of the accusations or refused to speak. A search of the premises uncovered significant evidence, including stolen bank cards, the laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, Reggie's expensive coin collection, the keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in Tiffany Cole's name. During the investigation, it was discovered that Tiffany had sold some of the stolen jewelry and spent the money with friends. After several hours of interrogation, Tiffany finally began to talk, bursting into tears as she confessed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple but claimed no further harm was done. The group then went on the run, using the stolen money for their own gain. Tiffany also implicated another individual, Bruce Kent Nixon, 19, who was paid $300 for his assistance in the crime. She stated that they never saw Bruce Kent Nixon again after the incident. Bruce Kent Nixon's decision to commit a crime was motivated by a promise of a fixed amount of money, which he quickly spent on illicit substances. As a result, he did not make an effort to hide or flee, living in the same city of Charleston. He was eventually arrested at his parents' home. It began in May 2005, when Tiffany visited the Summers to make a payment on a car she had purchased 6 months prior. The Summers, Carol, and Reggie were known for their hospitality and would often invite Tiffany to stay overnight or for a few days, treating her to good food and gifts. On this particular occasion, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend, and they were both welcomed to dinner and invited to stay overnight. During dinner, The Summers discussed their new life, and Carol inadvertently revealed that they had nearly $100,000 left over from the sale of their Charleston home, which they intended to use to enjoy their retirement without financial worries. Unbeknownst to her, Carol's careless comment sealed her in her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a telling glance, and that night, they began secretly plotting to get their hands on the Summers' substantial sum of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid they farewell and returned to South Carolina. Within a couple of weeks, they recruited accomplices and assigned roles and responsibilities. They then set their plan in motion. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an unassuming car. Meanwhile, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to the outskirts of Jacksonville, where they identified a secluded spot in the woods and started digging a deep hole, which would ultimately become the Summers' grave. On the morning of July 8th, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store, which she later provided to her accomplices, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan. That evening, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan approached the home of their intended victim, pretending to need assistance and asking to use the phone. Despite finding the young men suspicious, the homeowner, Carol, allowed them to enter. As soon as they were inside, they attacked Carol and her husband, who had rushed to her aid, threatening them with a toy gun. The Carol and Reggie was then bound with duct tape, blindfolded, and interrogated about the location of valuable items in the house, including their bank account information and PIN codes. They provided this information in an attempt to save their lives, as they were subjected to torture and death threats. After obtaining the necessary details, 2 additional individuals entered the house, assisting in dragging the Carol and Reggie into the backyard. They was then forced into the trunk of their own car, a Lincoln, which was being driven by Alan and Bruce Kent Nixon. Following behind them in a rented Mazda ARX-8 were Tiffany and Michael. The plan was that if a police patrol intercepted the car carrying the captive couple, a second car would draw the officers' attention away by recklessly speeding or breaking traffic rules. However, no police were encountered, and both cars reached their destination without incident. In the trunk, Reggie managed to free his arm and remove the bandages and duct tape covering his and his wife's faces, allowing them to breathe. However, there was no time to make any further attempts to escape. As the trunk lid opened, the Carol and Reggie was shocked and bewildered to see among their kidnappers Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had visited them recently. The kidnappers led the captive Carol and Reggie several dozen meters through the woods to a pre-dug grave. The Carol and Reggie begged for mercy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The young kidnappers brutally murdered them by burying them alive. According to Bruce Kent Nixon, the kidnappers spent about an hour burying the Carol and Reggie under earth. Throughout the horrific ordeal, the bound and helpless Carol and Reggie cried, confessed their love for each other, and said their goodbyes. The investigation revealed that the spouses had died from suffocation, with soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs, indicating they had been buried alive. After committing the heinous crime, the perpetrators abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They then went to the Sumner house, where they stole all the valuables they could find, before returning to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their freedom was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all participants in the crime were arrested 4 days later. During the trial, Bruce Kent Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and cooperated with the investigation, hoping for a lighter sentence. He led the authorities to the burial site of the spouses and provided a detailed account of the events of that fateful night. In contrast, Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, was the mastermind behind the crime, driven by greed after learning about the large sum of money the Sumner family had received from the sale of their house. Tiffany's lawyer argued that she was merely an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder. Michael and Alan chose not to testify, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The jury did not believe Tiffany Cole was innocent because she was involved in planning the crime, rented a car, and created a diversion in case they were chased by police. She also helped dig a grave for the victims and sold stolen items at a pawn shop, using the money to buy clothes and rent a limousine to celebrate their success, as seen in numerous photos. As a result, Bruce Kent Nixon was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Michael Jackson, Tiffany, and Alan Lindell were given the death penalty. The criminals filed multiple appeals, but they were all denied, and the sentence remained unchanged. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Callie Ann Poulton. Callie Ann Poulton was born on September 20, 1989, in Rochester, New York. As an only child, she received all the love and attention from her parents. However, when Callie turned 3, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother, Judy. Despite the divorce, Callie's father maintained a good relationship with Judy and regularly visited his daughter. After the divorce, Judy moved to a quiet suburban apartment complex in Rochester. Although Callie's father helped with childcare, Judy faced financial difficulties. To make ends meet, she took on a part-time job delivering magazines to her neighbors. Her goal was to save enough money to take Callie on a trip to Disney World the following summer. On the evening of May 23, 1994, Judy was preparing for her delivery shift. She was at home, inserting leaflets into the magazines, when Callie asked to go for a walk. It was an evening, and Callie wanted to ride her tricycle. Judy checked outside and saw other children playing in the yard, so she allowed Callie to go out for a short time, instructing her to stay within the yard. Callie ran outside with her tricycle, and Judy planned to finish preparing the magazines and then take Callie to McDonald's after completing her delivery route. Judy stepped outside with the magazines, intending to call out to her daughter Callie, but Callie was nowhere to be seen. Judy looked around the yard, called out her daughter's name, but there was no response. She searched the yard and then the surrounding complex grounds, but Callie was gone. Usually, when Callie rode her tricycle, the creaking of its wheels was noticeable, but now there was silence. As Judy's panic grew, she began to cry out for her daughter, drawing the attention of the neighbors. They joined her in searching for Callie, but no one had seen Callie. The complex was heavily wooded, and a fence separated the houses from the nearby highway, making it unlikely that Callie could have wandered off on her own. Judy knew that Callie was only allowed to ride her tricycle in their yard, and Callie had always obeyed her mother before. It was also unlikely that Callie could have gone far on her small bike without being seen. With each passing minute, Judy's fears grew, and she decided to call the police. The officers arrived quickly and began a thorough search of the complex. As the search continued, officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen Callie. Police suspected that Callie was still in the complex, and they believed the suspect was likely a resident of the complex. It would have been difficult for an outsider to get inside, kidnap Callie, and drive away without being noticed. To assist in the search, residents of the 300-apartment complex voluntarily allowed police to enter their homes. In case there was no one in the house, the complex manager used the spare key to search. Unfortunately, searching each apartment yielded no results. Callie and her bike were not found. After an all-night search, the case was reclassified as a kidnapping at around 4 a.m. A specialist unit took over the case, and detectives questioned Judy about possible enemies. They asked Judy if Callie's father was involved, but Judy ruled this out and said he had no motive. Detectives also asked if Judy had noticed anyone suspicious among the residents. She mentioned Mark, a 22-year-old man who had just moved in with his wife and young son. Judy noticed Mark's behavior was unusual. Judy and Mark spoke briefly a few times, and during one conversation, Mark commented that Callie was beautiful. Although Judy had heard similar comments from others, Mark's tone made her uncomfortable. What really caught her attention, however, was when Mark added that he had spied on all the little girls in the complex and that Callie was the most beautiful. Judy became increasingly wary of Mark after their conversations, and she made an effort to limit her interactions with him, even though they still occasionally crossed paths in the yard. One conversation in particular raised her suspicions. Mark asked Judy if Callie would tell Judy if someone tried to touch her. Judy found this question alarming and quickly ended the conversation. As a result, she no longer allowed Callie to play with Mark's son, even when she was present. During her conversation with detectives, Judy recalled a detail that had previously seemed insignificant. When she was searching for Callie, she had asked Mark if he had seen Callie, and he claimed he did. Judy also noticed that Mark's sneakers were missing their laces, but at the time, she was too worried about Callie to think much of it. The detectives brought Mark in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in Callie's disappearance. He even agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. However, Judy's own account provided Mark with an alibi, as she had seen him on the playground with his son at the time she was searching for Callie. The police also searched Mark's apartment but found no sign of Callie or her bicycle. As a result, Mark was no longer considered a suspect, and the investigation continued without any leads. The police investigation into Callie's disappearance began by questioning her mother, Judy, as a standard procedure. Judy cooperated fully, answering all their questions, but she found it distressing that the police were focusing so much on her when they had no other leads. As the search for Callie continued, the case received widespread attention, with news reports, billboards, and flyers throughout the city. The police received over 1,000 of tips, but unfortunately, each one led to a dead end, and the case remained unsolved for months. Despite the lack of progress, Judy remained hopeful that her daughter would be found alive. She quit her job to devote all her time to the search, printing and posting flyers, contacting media outlets, and working tirelessly to keep the case in the public eye. With the help of some compassionate supporters, she was able to raise $100,000 as a reward for any useful information. Judy's efforts led to national television coverage, including appearances on The Oprah Winfrey Show and a popular TV show about unsolved crimes. Judy also partnered with local businesses to distribute flyers in their offices, establishments, and on commercial vehicles. She even convinced 2 airlines to include the flyers in ticket envelopes. Although these efforts generated new leads, the police were unable to make any significant progress in solving the case. The turning point in the case occurred when a woman called the police on August 9, 1996 to report a serious argument with her husband. She was tired of his strange behavior and wanted a divorce. In an attempt to persuade her to stay, the husband confessed to a shocking crime: he had killed Callie. The woman was stunned and immediately called 911 and revealed her husband's identity to the police. The husband's name is none other than Mark Christie, Judy's neighbor. However, the detectives faced a significant obstacle. Under state law, any information shared between spouses was protected and inadmissible in court. This meant that even if Mark's confession was true, the police couldn't use it as evidence to arrest or question him. Furthermore, Mark had been in his yard with his child shortly after Callie's disappearance, and his apartment had been searched early in the investigation, making it unlikely that he had the opportunity to kidnap and kill her. The detective in charge of the case, Detective Crow, decided to talk to Mark after hearing his wife's story. Mark and his family had moved out of the complex just weeks after Callie went missing due to serious allegations. Mark had been accused by the 2 girls' parents of standing naked in front of his house, which made the detective suspicious. Although no investigation had been launched, the incident appeared to be suspicious. Crow traveled to Mark's new home, 50 miles from Rochester, but encountered resistance. Mark's mother opened the door and said her son would not talk to the police without an attorney present. Mark learned about his wife calling the police and contacted a lawyer. This meant that the police could not use Mark's confession to his wife as evidence, and his lawyer could prevent any questioning. Despite this, Crow persisted. While talking to Mark's mother, Mark appeared and Crow persuaded him to answer some questions about Callie's case. Crow suggested they discuss the matter over coffee at a nearby restaurant. Mark agreed to Crow's surprise, but only on the condition that Crow would then take him to see his lawyer. Crow and Mark stopped at a nearby Italian restaurant. Crow tried to engage in the conversation normally, avoiding any pressure or tense questions. This approach seemed to work as Mark began to open up more while they waited for their food. Mark expressed deep remorse for his actions towards Callie and explained that her image had haunted him for the past 2 years, constantly appearing on news reports and flyers. Crow tried not to scare Mark. Crow had spoken to Mark before in the early stages of the investigation. But this new conversation felt different. Crow believed that Mark was feeling proud of having avoided capture, so Crow decided to appeal to Mark's ego. Crow told Mark that Mark was actually smarter than the entire investigation team, and Mark responded by saying that he didn't want to sound boastful, but his method of handling the bike was actually very smart. Mark offered to share details about how he got rid of the bike, but only on the condition that Mark wouldn't discuss anything else. Crow maintained a friendly and non-threatening tone, reassuring Mark that he was in control of the conversation and could share as much or as little as he wanted. Mark said that Callie's tricycle had been in his apartment 3 days after she went missing. Mark knew that the police would probably search every apartment without a warrant when a child was in danger, but Mark found a loophole in the law. Although police could search for a missing child, they were not allowed to search for physical evidence. This meant they could only test spaces that were large enough for a child to fit. To hide the bike, Mark decided to disassemble it and hide the bike's parts in small and hard-to-reach areas of his apartment. He wrapped some parts in clothes and put them in the closet, and put other parts in small bags and took them out to the car. He then dumped the pieces in various locations far from home. Meanwhile, the police were stationed at the exit of the complex, checking each car, but since they were only looking for Callie, the small bags containing the bike parts did not arouse any suspicions. Detective Crow saw an opportunity to get a full confession from Mark. Crow took a sympathetic approach, suggesting that Callie's death may have been an accident and not Mark's fault. Mark asked about the sentence he could face, and Crow estimated it could be about 25 years. Mark felt this was unfair, as it meant he had to spend half his life in prison and away from his family. He also mentioned that he had lived with guilt for 2 years, implying that this should be taken into account when sentencing. Despite Mark's questionable logic, Crow continued to encourage Mark to confess, suggesting it would bring him relief. Mark agreed to tell the truth, but only after consulting with a lawyer. Crow knew that Mark's lawyer would advise Mark against confessing to a crime without solid evidence. So, Crow decided to be straightforward with Mark, explaining that if he didn't tell the truth, Callie's parents would never know what happened to their daughter. Mark responded by saying that Callie hadn't suffered. Crow senses that Mark was confessing and encourages him to do the right thing. Mark looked at Crow and finally admitted to his actions. He repeated that Callie hadn't suffered and Mark confessed to strangling her with his bare hands. He then added that he hadn't done anything else to her. Mark recounted the events of that evening, explaining that Callie had come to his apartment and asked to play with his 1.5-year-old son. Mark let her in and took her bike to the kitchen. Aware that Callie's mother wouldn't approve of her visiting, Mark let Callie go upstairs to play with the child without drawing Judy's attention to the situation. However, when Mark heard Judy calling out for her daughter in the yard about 10 minutes later, he panicked. He knew that Judy would be furious if she discovered that he had let Callie into his house without permission. In a moment of desperation, Mark went upstairs to the children's room and strangled Callie with his bare hands. Detective Crow was skeptical about certain aspects of Mark's story from the start. It seemed more plausible that Mark had lured Callie into his apartment under false pretenses, taking advantage of his wife's absence at work. Once inside, Mark might have attempted to molest Callie, but when he heard Judy calling out for her daughter, he may have panicked and killed Callie to avoid being exposed. Crow recalled that Judy had seen Mark wearing sneakers without laces, which suggested that he had used them to strangle Callie. This detail implied premeditation, contradicting Mark's claim that the crime was spontaneous. To avoid raising Mark's suspicions, Crow decided to continue listening to his story. Mark claimed that after the murder, he left Callie's body in the kitchen and took his son outside to establish an alibi. He deliberately allowed Judy to see him in the playground, hoping to deflect any suspicion. Once Judy began searching the complex, Mark returned home and hid Callie's body in a laundry basket, covering it with clothes. A short time later, he placed the basket in the trunk of his car. Mark confessed that the chaos of the search, with many people looking for Judy's daughter, allowed him to carry out these actions unnoticed. Mark took his son and drove to the building where he worked as a security guard. He parked near the back, left the basket with Callie's body by the door, and then entered the building through the main entrance, telling his co-workers he had forgotten something at work. His toll didn't raise any suspicions. So he made his way to the back door, which he opened from the inside, and retrieved the basket. Mark then climbed onto a large tank containing liquid coolant, opened the top, and dropped Callie's body into it after tying a heavy metal object to her. He got rid of Callie's clothes but left her earrings on. After disposing of the body, Mark returned home and joined the neighbors in searching for Callie. By doing so, he had already removed the body from the complex before the police became involved, and no one suspected anything. At the end of his confession, Mark expressed regret for killing Callie, stating it was a mistake. Crow paid for their food, and Mark left a $2 tip before willingly going with Crow to the police station, where he was arrested for murder. When Mark's lawyer found out about the confession, he attempted to retract it, but the attempt was unsuccessful. This was because Mark had provided the information willingly, and Detective Crow had followed proper procedures. As a result, the police went to Mark's workplace, opened the tank, and made a gruesome discovery. Even after 2 years, the victim's body was still inside. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, experts were unable to determine the cause of death or gather any further information. They confirmed the identity of the remains, which was none other than Callie. Mark admitted his guilt to the judge and received a minimum 25-year prison sentence, just as Detective Crow had predicted. Although Mark's lawyer managed to have the kidnapping charges dropped, he was still convicted of murder. However, Mark's case took a surprising turn in 2010. The police reopened a 1988 case involving the brutal murder of 74-year-old Viola Manville, who was killed while walking in a Rochester suburb. At the time, Mark was just 16 years old and was considered a suspect, but he passed a polygraph test, showing no signs of deception. As a result, another man, Frank Sterling, was arrested and eventually confessed to the crime after a lengthy overnight interrogation. Years later, Frank tried to appeal his sentence, claiming that the police had coerced his confession and that he was disoriented by the end of the interrogation. However, his appeals were unsuccessful until 2010, when the case was reopened and new evidence was sent to the lab. DNA analysis revealed the suspect's DNA matched not Frank's, but Mark Christie's. Mark, 39 at the time, admitted to murdering Viola in 2011 and received an additional 28 years in prison. Despite his confession, he showed no remorse and never revealed his motives for the crime. Meanwhile, Frank was finally released from prison after 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. He went on to sue the authorities and was awarded nearly $10 million in 2014. However, his life was cut short when he died of a heart attack in 2017 at the age of 54. Mark is currently serving his sentence in prison, but he may be eligible for parole in the near future. It's unclear whether he will be released, and his case serves as a reminder of the importance of thorough investigations. If the investigators had not mistakenly focused on Frank and coerced a false confession, Mark might have been caught earlier and possibly prevented from committing another crime, the murder of Callie. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family soon after her birth, and her mother, Shannon, moved back in with grandparents. When Kirsten was 2 years old, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon remarried, but the marriage was short-lived, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 young daughters alone. Kirsten, being the older sibling, took on a lot of responsibility, helping her mother care for her younger sister, Faith. Kirsten and Faith shared a bedroom, while their mother slept in the adjacent room. On May 13, 1997, Shannon put her daughters to bed as usual. Kirsten was 8 years old, and Faith was 3. However, Faith had already fallen asleep, so Shannon only said goodnight to Kirsten and left the door to their room slightly open, as she always did, in case Kirsten or Faith needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was awoken by a noise coming from the girls' room. Thinking one of her daughters was awake, Shannon got out of bed to check on them. As she approached the door, the noise stopped. Assuming her daughters had gone back to sleep, Shannon was about to return to her room when she noticed that the door to their room was now completely closed. This was unusual, as she was certain she had left it slightly open. She wondered if one of them had closed the door or if she had simply forgotten to leave it open. Shannon opened the door slightly to check, but she didn't enter the room before returning to bed. Shannon went to wake up her daughters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, but only found Faith in their bedroom. Shannon asked Faith where Kirsten was, and when Faith said she didn't know, Shannon began a thorough search of the house. However, Kirsten was nowhere to be found. Shannon then checked outside the house and contacted the parents of Kirsten's friends to see if she had come to their house. But no one had seen her. Shannon's search efforts led her to call her father, who lived nearby, to see if Kirsten had gone to his house or not. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen her either. At this point, Shannon realized Kirsten was missing, and her father advised her to call the police. When the police arrived, they initially thought Kirsten might be hiding in the house or had simply wandered off for a walk, given the town's low crime rate. However, upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the frame. This raised their suspicions that something more serious had occurred. Further investigation led them to discover a piece of children's underwear stained with blood on the ground outside the window. After confirming with Shannon that the underwear belonged to Kirsten, the police realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping. More officers were called to the scene to assist with the investigation, which marked the beginning of a more extensive search for Kirsten. The police investigation into Kirsten's disappearance began with a search of the area around the house. During this search, the police spoke with Kirsten's mother, who reported hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and now realized that it may have been the sound of her daughter being taken. Despite the search, nothing suspicious was found, and the police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with all the residents. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night of the abduction. However, one neighbor did mention being woken up by a barking dog around 3 a.m., which coincided with the time of the abduction. With no solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to interview Faith, who was only 3 years old. Despite her young age, Faith was able to share what she had witnessed, but her statement was limited to a single phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but unfortunately, it did not provide any further information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Working on this theory, police discovered that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had a history of drug-related problems. The detectives considered the possibility that the abduction might be related to this. Perhaps the mother owed money to some people in the criminal underworld, and they decided to take her daughter as payment. The police did not rule out the mother willingly handing over her daughter. This would explain why the abduction happened almost silently. The investigation into Kirsten's disappearance continued, with detectives initially speaking to Shannon, her mother. Shannon denied any involvement, claiming to have been clean from substance abuse for some time and insisting she would never harm her daughter. Although detectives were not convinced of Shannon's innocence, they could not find any evidence to prove her involvement. The police then turned to the public for help, using the media to ask for any information that might be relevant to the case. In response, they received hundreds of calls, but most of the calls were fruitless. However, one clue provided a promising lead. A woman reported her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, including aggressive outbursts and a disturbing threat he made during an argument. The police investigated the man and discovered that he knew Shannon's brother, which meant Kirsten might have known him too. Additionally, the man had a history of drug use and assault, and he had previously been familiar with the Hatfield family home. Despite this, the investigation ultimately found that the man had a solid alibi for the time Kirsten went missing. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he was at a bar until around 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, making it impossible for him to have abducted Kirsten. Detectives pursued multiple leads, but each one led to a dead end. As time passed, the hope of finding Kirsten alive began to fade. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, refused to give up. She took matters into her own hands, determined to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even investigated potential suspects on her own. However, Shannon faced numerous obstacles. Many local businesses refused to display Kirsten's flyers, citing company policies. She also attempted to meet with the state governor, but was unsuccessful. Shannon established a volunteer center to help find Kirsten. The center focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media. However, Shannon encountered new challenges. Some volunteers stole money, lied about their work, and used the media to gain attention for themselves. Despite these setbacks, Shannon persevered in her search for the truth. After years of effort, Shannon realized that her approach was not yielding results. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a parole officer. Shannon's goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect others from potentially dangerous criminals who might be released from prison. Shannon suspected Kirsten's kidnapper had a history of violent crimes. To pursue this lead, she researched people with violent pasts in her area but found no connection to Kirsten's disappearance. Despite her efforts, she eventually had to accept that Kirsten might have passed away and might not return. Still, Shannon continued to search for answers. Periodically, police reopened the case to investigate new leads, working with the FBI to create an updated sketch of Kirsten's possible appearance. In 2014, there was a breakthrough in the Kirsten case. A woman contacted the police and shared a shocking discovery she had made while sorting through her late mother's belongings. Among her mother's possessions was a diary detailing the woman's father's confession. claiming he had killed Kirsten Hatfield. The diary was extremely detailed, and detectives were convinced of its accuracy. According to the diary, the man had kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom, took her to a house he owned in a nearby town, and murdered her after horribly torturing her. The description of the crime process spanned many pages, leaving even veteran investigators confused. The diary also revealed that the crime had been recorded on a videotape. Investigators immediately questioned the woman's father. However, his reaction was surprising. While he denied any involvement in the Kirsten case, he asserted that he had known who was responsible for Kirsten's death, saying the murder had occurred at his ex-girlfriend's house. The police were confused and asked for the house address. They quickly received a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly search this house. The forensic investigation began with a crucial step: the use of luminol, a substance that glows when exposed to very small amounts of blood. When the forensic team applied luminol to the scene, they were surprised by the results. An expert later described the house as lit up like a Christmas tree due to the numerous bloodstains. The bloodstains matched the details of the murder described in the diary, leading the team to believe they had finally found concrete evidence. To investigate further, police removed the floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper, and sent these items to a laboratory for analysis. They also organized an excavation team in the hope of finding the victim's body. In addition, the police also discovered a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, so they had to review the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might have contained footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, but after hours of analysis, none of the tapes were related to the murder. Excavations also proved fruitless, with no remains or evidence found in the soil. However, just when the investigation seemed to have been gaining momentum, the police encountered an unexpected and shocking episode. Experts who analyzed the bloodstains in the house concluded that the bloodstains had actually belonged to an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police stunned and wondering what had just happened. Had someone deliberately deceived them with a cruel joke? Or was the person writing the diary struggling with mental health issues and convinced by a false narrative that had developed in their mind? The truth was still unknown. Detectives had run out of leads in Kirsten's case, and the case was once again stalled. In an effort to revive the investigation, the case was reassigned to a new detective named Daryl Miller in the summer of 2015. Miller decided to start from scratch and review all existing documents and records. During his scrutiny, Miller discovered something surprising. His predecessors had overlooked some key evidence, including blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. The evidence had been stored in a warehouse, but shockingly had never been sent to a laboratory for analysis. Miller suspected that the reason for this might have been because police initially thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, which would not have yielded any useful results. However, Miller decided to send them to the laboratory for analysis. The results were surprising. The blood sample did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unidentified man. This was a significant breakthrough after many years of investigation. Miller decided to collect DNA samples from all the men who had participated in the investigation since the kidnapping. Police tracked down each person on the list and sent their DNA to a lab for analysis. Everyone was cooperative and provided their DNA samples quickly. Miller patiently waited for the results, and finally he received a call from the lab. Experts had analyzed one of the samples and found a perfect match with bloodstains found on the window and the victim's underwear. The DNA belonged to Anthony Palma, 56. The Hatfield family's neighbor who lived across the street. Anthony had been one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. At the time, he claimed to have woken up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now that his DNA had been linked to the crime scene, detectives decided to bring him in for further questioning. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient for a conviction, the investigators hoped to obtain a confession from Anthony. A confession would expedite the trial and potentially lead them to Kirsten's body, which was still missing. To get Anthony to talk, the detectives invited him for questioning, telling him it was a routine process. They claimed they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, to gather new information. In reality, their goal was to get Anthony to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Detectives asked Anthony to recall any additional details about the night in question. He retold the same story he had shared 18 years earlier. But this time he added a new detail. He claimed to have seen a white car parked outside Kirsten's house, although he didn't think much of it at the time. The police then asked Anthony about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. He stated that he knew them as neighbors, but he had never interacted with Kirsten personally. He maintained that he got along well with the other neighborhood children, who would often ask him for help fixing their bikes or visit him for candy. This conversation became a critical point in the investigation, as the police had discovered Anthony's blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's bedroom. When they asked if he had ever entered the house, Anthony claimed he had not. This statement raised suspicions, as the presence of his blood suggested otherwise. The detectives faced a challenge. Anthony's blood was fresh, suggesting it had been left recently, but he had had a visit to the house when it belonged to a friend. The investigators decided to move forward with the interrogation. Informing Anthony that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony repeatedly denied ever entering the house, despite the evidence to the contrary. The investigators attempted to extract a confession, but he consistently maintained his innocence. The detectives changed their approach and exited the room, leaving Detective Miller to speak with Anthony privately. Miller entered with a photo of Kirsten, placing it in front of Anthony. However, Anthony promptly pushed the photo away, refusing to look at it for the remainder of the conversation. Miller asked various questions, attempting to prompt Anthony into a confession, but he continued to deny any involvement. Failing to obtain an admission of guilt, the police ended the interrogation and apprehended Anthony. A subsequent search of his residence, made possible by a search warrant, uncovered no evidence of Kirsten's remains or any other relevant evidence. During the trial, Anthony repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. But DNA evidence told a different story. As the trial progressed, new details emerged that the police had initially overlooked. It was revealed that Anthony had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for breaking into a girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been imprisoned in the 1980s for a violent attack involving a weapon. Anthony's past convictions signaled his dangerousness, yet were overlooked in 1997. In 2017, a jury returned a guilty verdict for Kirsten's kidnapping and Kirsten's murder, and Anthony was sentenced to life in prison. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony never disclosed the location of Kirsten's body. Kirsten's mother refused to give up hope, however. She consistently reached out to Anthony, calling and visiting him in prison, in an effort to find out where Kirsten's body was. She spent hours trying to extract the truth from him, but ultimately, she was unsuccessful. Tragically, in 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, who was motivated by a desire for revenge for Anthony's horrific crime against a child. As a result, Kirsten's family's only hope of finding Kirsten's body now depends on hikers or tourists who might stumble upon it in remote national parks, where Anthony may have buried her.